Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy, Lore, and More, we have Mariëlle S. Smith joining me to talk about writing diverse characters in fantasy books. And she will tell me if I pronounced her name right after this introduction. Mariëlle S. Smith coaches creatives on their path to fulfilling their creative calling using a combination of life coaching, Akashic Records, readings, cartomancy, and Reiki. She's also a writer of YA and NA fantasy. I believe NA is new adult fantasy for those who don't know. She's also an editor and the co-host of Diving Into Writing, which is a podcast, as I just learned about, and it sounds very cool. There'll be a link to that in the show notes of the description, so you can check it out too. There's 3 seasons of interesting things to listen to. And she previously co-hosted the Doing Diversity in Writing podcast. So wow, Mariëlle has just really been involved in so many things. So welcome to the show, and let's talk about writing diverse characters. And did I get your name right?
Actually, no, that's not, because when you practice before you hit record, that was great. So just say Mariëlle or Mariëlle. Marielle's fine.
Mariëlle?
Yes, that is it. Yeah. So the one when you said, "Oh, you don't look so sure," that was actually a great. That's a great pronunciation of my name. Yeah, you overcorrected.
Darn.
Yeah, so I was just so Diving Into Writing is an ongoing podcast. And you said, so we don't even do seasons. I can't remember which episodes we're on, somewhere in the hundreds.
Wow.
And Doing Diversity, well, I wasn't there from the start. During the pandemic, they couldn't do the podcast together anymore, so I was invited. I was a previous guest to the podcast, so my current co-host was like, I need a new co-host. You did really well on the podcast. Do you want to host this show with me? And I was like, that's great. So that's how I joined. And it's Doing Diversity in Writing that's done. But we have 3 seasons available with tons of information on how to write and to include diverse characters in your fiction writing.
So then I guess today we're going to get a more like a Cliff Notes version, as we can't do 3 years worth of podcast episodes in one episode.
No, that's why I'm like, it's still there. Like if you go to Podbean or Spotify or I think even Google Podcast, it's still there. So you can listen to all of the episodes on there. So if I miss anything, because I have so many notes right now that I'm like, oh, I want to share this with you. But I'm like, if I miss anything, they can go to there's actually a separate episode on writing diverse characters in fantasy and sci-fi.
Oh,
so we actually have an episode on it. And we do a lot of comparing in that episode between how diversity was translated from books to their film or TV adaptations.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. The one that comes to my mind most recently is obviously Dune.
Oh, I haven't watched that.
But I mean, there have been many versions of it over the years. Some have been very whitewashed casts. Some of them have, well, I think most of them have been very whitewashed casts. I'm trying to think of like
probably.
Yeah.
I
think of other ones that would have diversity, and my brain is totally blanking. I mean, Lord of the Rings was very whitewashed, which I love them, but I feel like they're kind of I do love the Amazon version with the new, more diverse casts. I do like that.
We talk about Lord of the Rings on that episode. But we for example talk about Game of Thrones, and that which I have not finished the books and I've never seen the show, so that was really interesting because I do know about the criticism, and I taught this stuff for almost 10 years at university, so I've learned a lot through students' writing. So one of my students wrote about Daenerys, and that she became like this sort of white savior for a bunch of slaves. And this student said that in the book, the slaves were like of diverse ethnicity and diverse background. And then in the TV series, it was like a sea of people of color. So it's like, so the book is very diverse, but when they put that in visual, so the slave people become people of color. Wow, where did we see that before?
Yeah.
So that's a very problematic sort of. But on the other hand, we have shows like The Witcher and Shadow and Bone, which I don't know. Actually, I don't know how diverse Shadow and Bone is like on paper, but I know that The Witcher is not. So they brought a lot of diversity into the world when it went to TV.
I think
Which
Shadow and Bone did have diversity because I know there was like differently abled people in there. I have the books, I just haven't read them.
okay, so that's so then it's great, right? So I love
Yeah.
it when authors are like, no, this is what I intended with my stuff.
Yeah.
Please make sure this translate. But I have the same now with so this is not fantasy. Well, maybe it is a bit of fantasy. I don't know if you've seen Bridgerton.
I've not watched Bridgerton because I'm not into romance and stories that primarily focus on romance, but I've seen media about it, like that it's very diverse, and I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful, like seeing all the diversity, but I don't enjoy stories that are like
Regency
centered
romance.
around just romance in general, where the entire
Yeah.
plot is getting people together or
Yeah.
getting married, or I don't enjoy that. Like I need the story to be about more than that. So I don't watch it, but I think the diversity is cool.
Yeah, so that is like I rave about that show on the podcast so often because they have really done. They show a world like they show what could have been possible if we hadn't created a world, because it's like the way the world is created along racial lines. That's like a man-made structure, right? That's not a natural origin. That it is natural is a story that we keep telling ourselves, right? But it's not. And they show us like what the world could have looked like if we at one point had intervened and said, you know what, all this racial inequality, it's nonsense. Let's erase it, right? Let's give people like different statuses and then see what society does. So I really love that about if people who are listening who do love Regency and romance.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'm like, that is well done. And it's not done in a way that they ignore actual history, because we learn in the series that a king made this decision because he fell in love with a black woman. So the king decided, you know what, we're going to raise this entire social group to our own status, right? So a lot of black people, black families were given like titles and estates and stuff like that. So so they make it very clear that this is a decision that was made, and that now we have to keep that up.
Oh wow.
Which I'm like, this is great, because you do not ignore the actual lived reality of racial inequality, but at the same time you show, but this is what it would be like if we completely erased it.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So I'm like, where do I start?
It's like we went to Regency romance, and I'm like, I can't really comment.
you come back to that.
I write and read fantasy.
Well, I mean, I can give you a list of fantasy books who did it right, and or not. Maybe I should say fantasy authors who do it better.
Maybe we could save that towards the end, because I don't want to like disparage somebody or somebody be upset that they weren't on the list. But
and I also don't like, because I tend to I personally prefer just uplifting the people who are doing well and just not discuss the people who, in my eyes, have made a faux pas when it comes to writing diversity. But like, I don't know where you are in terms of the importance of representation of diverse characters and why it is important, why we should care about this, or whether I can assume that you do and we can just move into the actual, okay, then how do we do it?
I think it's important, but I think we should discuss why it's important, because there could be someone listening out here who's on the fence about it and is not sure. Because for a long time, like I wasn't sure. I still don't know exactly how to write diverse characters correctly. I just am trying to be very mindful of like, okay, let's not do the stereotypes, but it's difficult to do that because you have to recognize the stereotypes and that they are influence your thinking, and that is difficult to do, but necessary.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't you start with why you think it's important, and then I just jump into that.
I think I didn't understand how important it was until I saw something. I don't remember like where I saw this, somewhere on social media, and it was a little girl, and she was watching something, and there was a fantasy character who looked like the little girl, and she was just like that. And I just remembered like being a little girl and wanting a brown-haired Barbie when there's a sea of blonde ones, and I just wanted one Barbie with brown hair because I had brown hair. I did not have blonde hair, and I could not. I just remember being in Toys R Us when I was little and could not find a single doll that had brown hair. I'm sure there were brown-haired Barbies at that time. This was the 1980s, but that store did not have them, and being very upset by that because they didn't look like me. And then I remember the Aladdin movie coming out, and there was Jasmine, which her hair was black, but she had dark hair like I did. Yeah. She had long dark hair, the olive complexion like I have. And I was like, I had so many Jasmine dolls because she looked like me, and I don't look like Barbie. So like, I think, so when I saw that little, that whatever that was with the little girl seeing that, I just flashed back to being that little girl in Toys R Us wanting a brown haired Barbie. And then, you know, the delight at like the Aladdin movies and seeing Jasmine and the dolls, and like, finally there is a doll who's not blonde. Because I am not blonde. And that's kind of where I was like, okay, I want people to see themselves in this fantasy world that I am creating. So and trying to figure out, well, how do we do that? Because it is a fantasy world. It's not based on our world.
Well, what you said is just like, that's exactly it, right? It's like being seen, being acknowledged, right? Being embraced. That is so important. And I mean, this always makes me think of. So I have, together with other people, I created 2 anthologies to sort of uplift voices. So we have one on bisexuality to sort of counter bi invisibility or bi erasure, and then we have another one on transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer characters. And in that one, in the anthology, we had a guest editor who is trans, and she writes in the introduction. She writes that, like, when she grew up and she knew something wasn't right? She's like, something is not, like, I'm not like everybody else. Right. And when she finally realized what was the case, when she looked around her, like all the representations in media about trans people, trans women specifically, there was ridicule, there was very negative representation. And she was like, well, if that's who I am, like, I don't think I want to live in that world. So, and she's not the first trans person to have thoughts of ending things, right? Because it was getting better for a while, and now I feel like we're backtracking. So she writes that there was at one point she reads, and I always forget how to pronounce his name, Rick Riordan.
Yeah,
is that the author's name?
I don't either. So we'll just go with that, because I don't know the correct pronunciation either. So if we're wrong.
So she read one of his books, and I think there's like a genderqueer character in it. And so I don't think it was a transgender character, a genderqueer character. And just that was enough of an affirmation of who she was, that she sort of snapped out of that and be like, okay, right, if these kind of characters are also there, then I can, it gave her so much purpose. So when I say that, like, representation is important because it's life affirming. If you never see yourself anywhere, or if you never see yourself anywhere in a positive way, like, how can you think positively about yourself? How can you think you're worth anything? So that for me is like indeed why it is. And the example that you gave is like, if there is something a little bit different about you, and you look at the TV, you are in a store, and you're just like, I just really want something that is like me. And that is why, and I think that I know the video you mentioned, I think that went incredibly viral. Yeah. Because it's a very touching moment. And the thing is, it's not just that she recognizes herself, but she realizes that this is a moment. It means that she has never before recognized herself in such a role. And that is the heartbreaking part, because no white little girl, especially not with blonde hair,
Yeah. And blue
will have
eyes,
will
which
have
I
that
don't
moment.
have,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. So they will not have that moment when they like when Disney brings out a new film, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's there I am," because Disney is saturated with these kind of girls.
Yeah.
So they will never have that moment of, "Oh, that's me."
Yeah. That moment you're like, I could be the hero too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I can be the main person in this story, right? I can be the main character, not just some sort of like side character or in somebody
Right.
else's life. Yeah.
Because
Yeah. No, exactly.
Barbie had friends who were dark hair, but Barbie was always blonde. And in so many things, like the hero, she's blonde. Supergirl, she's blonde. And I'm like, then Wonder Woman, and I'm like, there we go. She's not blonde.
Yes. Yeah.
She's not blue-eyed. She looks like me. Well, not exactly. I don't have that physique, but like
Enough like you. Enough.
yeah,
like you.
you know.
I don't think anybody looks like like
No,
Wonder
but
Woman.
it I don't have to be blonde and blue-eyed in order to have all the things and do all of the amazing things. I don't have to look like Barbie. I can be me.
Yeah, and that's exactly. So that's it. That's it exactly.
Yeah.
To be visible and to be visible in a good way, because like if you think about, for example, Muslim representation.
Yeah.
There's Muslim representation everywhere. Will it give Muslims a really good feeling about themselves? Very unlikely, just because of the negative stereotype. Same with Black people, right? Everywhere. Is it positive? Is it empowering?
No.
I think we're getting there, but I think the balance is still hugely. It's there's no balance yet. So that is why it's important to have this conversation, in my not so humble opinion.
I agree.
So, should I just go to my notes?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
hear like
Yeah.
what you had queued up for this, because I'm curious what your talking points were.
Yeah, because the thing is, there are some things I'm like, you just need to know this about diversity, because I think a lot of people, when they hear that, like you also said it, like I don't necessarily know yet how to do this thing. So a really important point, like first point I want to make, is that diversity is not just like race and ethnicity. I think that is what when we hear about diversity, that's what we think. Right? We think, oh, it's about like in literature, there's a lot of white main characters and a lot of white side characters. Where are people of other ethnicities, of other skin colors? That is an issue. It's definitely an issue, but there is so much more to diversity. So it includes, like the list is endless, right? Like nationality, gender, so cisgender, transgender, sexuality. I think there are over 300 ways to be a non-binary person, for example. Like the diversity is intense, right? There is age, there is class, like religion or spirituality. There is mental and physical abilities, and disabilities, of course. There's education. There's even like, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Were you raised by a single parent? Were you raised by two parents? And was that your original mom and dad, or like your mom and a stepdad? Do you come from do you have a childhood with multiple parents? Right? That's also a thing that we don't see really in the media. Or were you raised by grandparents or other family members? Are you an orphan? Right? Do you make friends easily or not?
I think in fantasy we have overrepresented the orphans.
Yes,
because that is such a trope in fantasy. Sorry to cut in. I think we've done that. We need to stretch out and do other types of family situations.
Yes, that's such a common, like, oh, it's an orphan, and that's why they are that's why they are in a new environment. And that's why they need to deal with certain stuff, right? Like, or they are an orphan, that's why they're in a shitty situation, and that's why this novel needs to happen. So to get them out of this shitty situation, right?
You could put them in a shitty situation and not have them be an orphan. One of my protagonists is he's an orphan, but he has a brother, and he's raising he's as a son that he is raising, and he's still in pretty bad situations. and has to get out of it.
Like, we can make our characters' life miserable, and that's our jobs.
Oh yeah,
without killing off their parents.
Yeah, his parent actually isn't dead, but he doesn't know it. So it's not technically an orphan. He doesn't know it. So yeah, it's been hinted. Whenever the characters let me do the full reveal, we will. They just keep avoiding it. So I'm sorry, readers. They just don't want to do it.
I love how your characters are like so in control of you. Like, that's
They
not
are.
like my characters are much, to an extent, much better behaved. But
they are. I can't make them do anything. It's like
but my point is that
go ahead.
that list is endless, and diversity is in so many, like even the eye color and the hair color. Right? You can have a bunch of white characters, but do they all have to be blonde? No. Do they all have to blue eyed? No, they do not. So you can find diversity everywhere, but I think the thing is that we're not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that we tend to reproduce what we come across. So if we see the same thing over and over, when we start writing, unless we're conscious of the fact that this is what we always see, and that might happen if you, as a little girl, never find a doll that's like you, then you're like, if I write a female character, she's going to have brown eyes and brown hair, right? But if you've never had that experience, but that's my point. Like,
all my characters are brunettes. I'm sorry, blondes.
But that's the thing, right? It's because you were aware that this was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not aware that certain things are an issue, right, you cannot consciously add these things to your fictional worlds to create more diversity. So it's the becoming aware.
Yeah, I didn't do it though, make everybody a brunette. I just don't see any natural blondes, and I don't know a single natural blonde. I know people who dye their hair to make it blonde, but I knew them when I know their hair is actually brown, and if they didn't go to the salon, their hair would look like mine. So I don't believe there are any real blondes out there. So I just nobody has blonde hair.
Oh, they are
in my world.
There are. So I live in Cyprus. So
there are real blondes.
Culturally, the Cypriots have brown to black hair, but there are a lot of Germans here. A lot of Dutch people are blonde. I was not like I was blonde as a child. Like, I was born a redhead, and then I went blonde for a little bit, and then I became a redhead again. My mom was blonde as a child. We also have a lot of Scandinavian people here who are very blonde. Yeah, so it is a thing. It's not a myth.
Okay, they do exist.
Yeah, but I have the same. I mean, do I have any blonde character?
But aren't all the Scandinavians elves anyways? There was a Scandinavian fellow that I follow on his TikTok, and he's always like joking about that. He's like, but we are elves. You don't want to mess with us.
I didn't think we were allowed to talk about that yet. I thought that was like
it's a fantasy podcast.
The big unknown secret about Scandinavia. Yeah.
It might be. I'm not Scandinavian. I'm not read in.
So you can break the rules. So that's really my first point that I want to make, is that diversity is everywhere. And if you start thinking diversity, you're like, how am I going to add like this ethnicity or that ethnicity to my world? Well, maybe that isn't natural to your world, depending on the kind of world that you're shaping. But think about other things. There are so many ways, because we are diverse, right? Even one person having divorced parents and the other person not having divorced parents, that makes them different. That makes their upbringing different. That makes their lived experience different. You can use that in how their character came to be, like how their personality came to be, right? It's a different background. So that's definitely the first point I want to make, that we have to not make it such a big thing. Right, you can if you have your cast of characters, and this depends on your fantasy world because it might not exist in your world, but you can just give them one of them a pair of glasses, right? Or if you have a fantasy world in which glasses do not exist, you'll just give one of them really bad eyesight, because no matter whether you've decided that glasses are a thing in your world or not, that doesn't make people free from bad eyesight, right? So if you have a world where nobody has bad eyesight, nobody is bad of hearing, that's very like it's not realistic, right? Those things existed before the reason we came up with glasses and hearing aids is because these things existed.
That's true.
So this is something you could just give that to someone, and it doesn't really have to affect the plot at all.
Well,
Right?
it does, because if I have a character who has hearing issues, and sometimes he doesn't hear what people are telling him and might not get the plan, because not realizing that, because this happens with my mom is hard of hearing, and you'll be talking to her, and if she doesn't see you, she doesn't hear you, she doesn't know you were just talking to her. And you think she got everything, because she might be reading something and might nod along with what she's reading, and you think I've had this sort of happen, and you think, and then later you're like, yeah, well, I told you. She's like, we didn't have this conversation. I've been sitting here reading for several hours. You never came over and talked to me.
I have the exact same with my mother.
So it could affect the plot.
Yeah. It could. That's why it could.
Because hearing characters don't realize. Yeah.
So I'm not saying like give somebody bad hearing and then don't do any, like don't make it a struggle for them. Right. In certain situations. I'm just saying, if you're looking for things to add that do not immediately influence like the course of things.
Right.
Like you can so certain things you can just add, and they can be a nuisance or a little bit of an obstacle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your entire novel changes. Right? If you give your main character like a severe disability, then you have to rethink things, most probably. But in a lot of cases, you can just add, like it's like hair color, right? Like you can change that. You can change whether they grew up, like I said, like with both their parents, or maybe like were they good parents? Were they alcoholics? You can go crazy. Just thinking about the possibilities, like, oh wait,
I see what you're saying. So instead of worrying so much about like skin color or something to make something diverse, like we are at the intersection of many different things. You can bring people into your fantasy world by other things that they may have experienced in their life, and having a character that has had similar struggles, so that they might see themselves in that person who has similar struggles. Am I getting it, or am I off?
No, and you use the word intersection. That is great, because in academia, in feminist theory, this is called intersectionality.
I have heard that word before.
Yes, and that is the acknowledgement that we are not just a gender or a race, but that all these things work together and they influence each other. So this is actually something that I want to, let me just skip to that, because and you already mentioned this as well. One of the
I think it's important for fantasy, because sometimes, especially if your world is built, because I had a scientist on here yesterday, and she was talking about her world and how she figured out the ocean currents and the atmosphere, and then and she came at it that way, figuring out like the conditions of the place they were living in and how that would affect people, and that's how she ended up with diversity in her world, going by like, well, where are they living and what is that like in our world, and what are the people like there, and just basing it on cultures who are already living in geographic places that have that sort of climate, that sort of setup, and just and then just putting her own spin on it. And I thought that was really neat. And that just brought to mind what you were just saying about the intersectionality. So I think for fantasy and sci-fi, like intersectionality can be very important, because we don't have the countries, we can't say I'm going to, like, unless you're writing urban fantasy or something where you're in the world, you can't be like, I'm going to make this person Korean American with this sort of backstory and get that. And then have, so that people of that background can see themselves in your world. Like, we can't do that with second world fantasy. We don't have Korea. We don't have China. We don't have these sorts of things. No. We have to find other ways to bring people in.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back, because so my second point, and
sure.
This one will follow from that.
Sure.
So another thing that you really need to, when you talk about representation, is that there are two steps to that. And we on that podcast, Doing Diversity Writing, we have an entire episode dedicated to that. So this is what I've been teaching for like years at the university, the steps of representation. So I'll try not to go into that lecture mode, but it's not like we don't like adding diverse characters to your world. That's not enough, right? Because I already said, like, there's Muslim representation. Is it positive? Is it empowering for Muslim people? No. So when you add people to your work, you also have to really look critically at how you are adding them. What kind of roles do you give them? What kind of characteristics? Are they the villain? Are they good people? And is everybody like, are all the villains the same? I once edited this novel by an author who was very excited by the diversity that he had put in his first novel, because the novel had 3 Black male characters. And then I, as the editor, had to point out that, yes, they're all bad guys. You have 3 male Black characters. One is the villain, the other one was a corrupt policeman, and I don't know what the other did, but it wasn't good. So I had to sort of like, I know you think you are doing a great job in terms of diversity, but you've just added them, and then you perpetuated stereotypes about them. So this is something that, adding them, step 1, adding them in a way that honors them as individuals, but also that doesn't enforce any stereotyping around them. So my point here would be, and you already sort of referred to that as well, like when you do add diverse characters, and this is like whether you add someone with a Black skin color or whether you add someone who has a hearing aid, right? Although, are there stereotypes around hearing aids? Maybe in the past. Like I can assume, I remember when I was younger, people wearing glasses, kids wearing glasses, they got a lot of slack, right? There was a lot of bullying.
Yeah,
so Google that.
Yeah, maybe. When I was a kid, it wasn't, but a lot of kids in my school that I remember had glasses. So sort of hard.
Okay.
If there's only like a few, then you're the other. But if it's across like all the all the different social cliques, there are people with glasses. It like you can't be a cool kid and have glasses and pick on one of the nerds who has glasses too, because they can just point and say, well, you are 4 eyes too. Like they can just turn around and throw it back at you, and you have you can't say anything. So maybe
and that's a good point too, right? If there's enough representation, the representation is no longer a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is if it's a plenty, right? That empowers people.
Yeah, it was more in my school, because I grew up in the New York metro area. It was if you were from, because there was always people from foreign countries, like that their parents had moved here, because you could commute from the town that I grew up in to New York City. And they would move here because it's they want to move to the suburbs and send their kids to the good schools and have like an actual house and not like a small apartment. But then then you go from this kid who was in like New York City public schools to now being in public schools that are not in New York City, which are very different. And so there was some ostracization there too, because they're different. They're very different from the kids who are there. And
I think it's very natural, right, to do an us and them.
Yeah.
Because that's just how our brains function as well. Like we want to understand the world, so we put them in certain boxes. I think it's a problem when we start evaluating one box over the other.
Yeah. I always thought they were cool, because I'm like, hey, what was it like in this school in the city? What was it like in your international school that you went to before this?
Yeah, but most people, when someone is different,
yeah,
right? There's sort of xenophobia, right? Like some fear hits in, like I don't know you.
Yes.
And I don't want you to threaten what I have. So I think as writers, we can be very aware of that and make sure that we do not perpetuate that in our writing, right? So whatever you decide to want, like if you decide, I'm gonna make this character into a lesbian, Google existing stereotypes about lesbians or tropes, like for example the that gay trope, right? There's a gay character, he dies, right? That's a very common trope in literature. It's changing, right? But like 20 years ago, I think that was it, right? So it's just that's why it became such a common trope, because everybody did it. Like, there's a gay character, and they're dead. Of course, they're dead, right? So it still happens, by the way, but I think we're more aware of that now. And also, I really think indie authors did a lot to create more diversity in books, because if you write a book that's not like other books, right? So other books are like the canon, which is very white still, unless you're like a voice that people think is going to represent, right? There are some authors who just get like a lot of attention from like traditional publishing, but then what you see in a lot of cases is that these publishing houses, they've reached their quota, right? So it's like, oh no, but we already have a Black female author, so we don't really need one anymore. We're good, right? So then what you have is you have this one story, this one novel who got a lot of attention about this Black girl or Black female character, and then and then that's it, right? Because they've kind of done their job. And I think because if you're indie, you don't have the gatekeeper, so you can write whatever you want, and you can create. I know so many Black indie authors, right? Who just and there's even this one author, and she's just apparently they're in romance. So I don't read straight romance. I do not care, right? I'm very sorry, but it's just not my genre.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So
guilty as charged.
Yeah, apparently there's a lack of interracial romance, right? So there are authors, and so there was this one author, and she's like, but my husband is white. I don't see myself anywhere. So what does she write? A ton of interracial romance. And she's very popular apparently in that specific genre. And I'm like, that is great. She created a niche. She created a niche genre, and people want to read it because how many Black women are in relationships with white guys? A lot. So if you've never read that, that's just, so I love that, right? So I think indie authors did a lot for us in terms of creating diversity, because nobody's telling them that, we don't want to sell your book if you're this diverse, right? And then of course we have the Own Voices movement, which is a lot of people telling their own stories. So now we get to the intersectionality part, that what we often see is that when people start adding diverse characters is that we have the norm, and then the character is allowed to have one different identity marker. So if they have a disability, they will be white and like middle classy often, and they have a disability. Or they can be, if they're gay, they're white and then they're gay. So if they're Black, they're Black. There's not much else, right? That's how they differ. And so if they're gay, that's how they differ. There's nothing else. But this is, of course, not really how the world functions, right? You can be gay and Black and disabled and come from a poor background, or from a very rich background. So all these possibilities exist in the world. So my point is that if you want to combine different identity markers, and I would recommend you do, because literally nobody exists like it. The world is more diverse than, this is the norm. So when I say the norm, I say like it's the white middle class straight male. That's the norm in the West. Like if you go to different corners of the world, the norm will be different, of course. But if you're in the West, that's the norm. So if you're just allowed to be like one step away from that, that's not how the world functions, right? That's not just what there is in the world. So if you start combining these different markers, you then have to Google the combinations, because if you, let's say you're writing a transgender woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
She will deal with different stereotypes than transgender men. Right? There's different stereotypes about them. But if you write a transgender Black woman, she will deal with different stereotypes than white transgender women, Asian transgender women, but also Black transgender men. So, and then of course, if you add something else on that, like level of education or nationality or religion, right? Those stereotypes shift again. So if you have a particular mix that you're giving to a character, Google the complete set. Okay, so what kind of stereotypes are there when you're both transgender, you're a transgender woman, right? And you come from a religious background. What happens in that? And is it different than what transgender white women have to deal with who also have a religious background? See if there's any differences, because often there are, because every culture deals different with these kind of things. And that's the intersectionality, that all these aspects, they influence each other. It's not an add-on, right? It's not like, so I'm this, this, and this, and this. No, it's like I am all these things and this happens. Mm-hmm. And how, what does that? What is that, how I am in the world and how people respond to me in the world? So that's when you said intersection, I'm like, that's the point that I wanted to make. And then another one before I want to move on to specifically
Sure.
fantasy is that it's never like, if you're listening to this and you're like, but I have my world already and I'm already writing. Like, I mean, this is a fantasy podcast, so I'm assuming that people who are the writers who are listening do not necessarily mess with standalones. They're probably writing series, maybe very long series.
I mean,
Because
I try to write standalones, but then the characters demand extra sequels,
yes,
or they won't let me finish the book, and I'm weak, so I give in to that.
I don't know how to write standalones. Like
I
I
don't
always,
either.
like,
I've
I'm just
given
gonna.
up on novellas too because they're like, I have an idea. It's nice and contained. The last time a character told me that, I ended up with a trilogy. What happened to that
See,
nicely contained idea?
this is how you learn. So I'm gonna show you for those who are for those who are watching. I'm just gonna. You see what I have in the back, right? Can I show this properly? Like you see all these things on the wall.
So I have to describe it for those who are just listening.
So
I was
there
wondering what
is
those
just
are.
there's a lot of paper on the wall behind me with post-its in different colors. That's a 15-book series that started as an idea, then became a 5-book series, then became a 10-book series, and then became a 15-book series. So that's one of the series I'm working on right now. So that's what it's looked out. That's the basic outline of that. So when I'm saying, like, if you write fantasy, thinking in standalones is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because my other project is a trilogy, and I already know that it could be like 9 books if I wanted to. So 3 different trilogies.
I have the same thing.
Yeah. So the point there is that if you're already writing something, it's never too late to layer it in, right? Because there will always be characters in the work you've already written that might not have a very specific background yet. And then in the next book, you can sort of casually mention that, like, maybe you haven't described them in such terms yet that people know what they look like. Or maybe you haven't told them yet about their parental situation, or that they come from a certain religion, or
we
that
write
they
fantasy.
color.
There's no such thing as healthcare. So if they're out fighting things, they may be losing a limb or ending up somehow with not as they started out. Maybe not with all their original parts and pieces.
Exactly. Yes. But then they can be colorblind. That has never been mentioned or relevant, and you can just add it, right? You can just add it. So that's a way. If you're like, I already have this world, and I'm now realizing how homogenous it is. Like, okay, you can course correct, right? Just look at the characters that you like. If you've described your main character in detail, you cannot suddenly make them a different ethnicity, right? That's just
but they could change their mind about who they like. They could
they can,
especially if you write adventure fantasy where people are not having relationships. Like, you could go 9 books and they suddenly have a crush on someone, and you're like, okay, well, they've been busy. I mean, they may have liked this person all along, and we just didn't know because they've been fighting dragons. And
so if in your head all your characters are straight, like in my head, I have to remind myself to add in the occasional straight character. That's my thing that I made a list to share about some of the characters in my work, just to give you an idea how I combine all these identity markers. And I was looking at, like, that bisexual, pansexual. I'm like, oh, I mean, at least I don't do bi erasure, so that's a good thing. But I was like, oh wow, there was a straight character. Oh, hello. But that's very hard for me to put in straight characters.
I have no idea what my character's like, because I write adventure stuff. If they suddenly have a crush on somebody, they suddenly have a crush on somebody.
But this is the thing. If you feel that they're ready to have a crush on something, you can then decide, you know what, maybe I am inclined, because you yourself are of a certain sexuality, to repeat that. Or you can say, what if this person is of the same sex, right? Or what if this person is non-binary, right? Like, what happens then? Right.
Yeah.
So you can make those decisions later
they don't
on.
Listen to me, the character.
Yeah. So we use a different case.
Yeah.
That's a different. If they're gay, you're just gonna learn.
Yeah.
But in my case, I'm like, you know what? You're gonna be into guys. Like, in the next draft, you're going to be into guys as well. That's just how it's going to work. That's how I write. So that's one thing, right? Like you can just sprinkle in some diversity with those characters that do not have, like, some things are not known yet about them in the book. Another thing is that,
and they can change. You can like guys in one book. You can decide after that adventure that you don't like them anymore. There's, especially
you
if
can
you're
have a
not writing.
bisexual awakening somewhere.
Especially since, like, if you don't write romance, like, characters can change their minds about things based on things going on in their adventures they're having and things that they're experiencing, especially if they're out in the wider world meeting more and more people. Like, that could change, you know?
And also, like, depending on the world you create, right? Maybe the taboo in that world is not like sexual relationships between the humans or the elves or the fairies or whatever you're writing, right? But maybe it's a taboo to do like an interspecies, right? So maybe that's very much frowned upon. So you can be like, okay, so I thought this character was always into the same species, but then they're in this adventure, and then they run into this amazing elf, and suddenly it's like, oh shit, am I also into elves? Right.
I mean, because you hear about that, people who didn't know that they had that you know, they're living their lives one way, and then they meet somebody who completely changes everything. Then they now like this person, and now it can change, and they're like now wondering about their identity. And you hear about that all. That's a real thing. Like, that's a real identity.
And it's also it's a trope, right?
But it's real
like,
too.
In romance, it's called the bisexual awakening.
Oh, okay, I don't read romance.
So
I didn't know that.
I read a lot of romance, but only queer romance. So there's always, like, it's one of the hashtags, right? Like you can look like it's not a category, but it's like you can it's very common, right? So people can change. So they can also change religions, by the way, or spiritual beliefs, spiritual practices. So you can play with that, right? If you're like, everybody believes in the same thing, maybe I can bring in somebody else, and then people start changing their minds about certain things. And so another thing is that if you look at your work as you have it, and you're like, okay, I do have some diverse characters, but they are like really, really minor characters. No, you're the writer. If you're not Melinda, you're the writer, so you get to make the decisions. You can bring them to the fore. Right? You can give them a bigger part. You can give them an actual character arc, so you can have them sort of develop. You can give them a complete backstory. You don't, and this is something that a lot of people do, right? Like, I do want to write their first characters, but I only add them like the ones on the sidelines, right? Because that feels safer. And I do understand, like, if you write very homogeneous books, maybe that is how you start. Right, just start safe, and then you start with your secondary characters, and then then you give your main character a little bit of diversity more than you usually.
Or you get used to that side character, and you fall in love with them, and you decide, I really want to make them a main. I'm comfortable enough with them. That's a path too. I have some characters that started out. I don't know why they added themselves to the book, and I was like, well, okay, they make things more diverse. Maybe you'll tell me your story later, and now they pop up in every book and just meddle in things, and I enjoy their antics, so I let them.
No, but this is exactly
right. Becoming reader favorites.
Yeah. And the thing is that there are some, right? I'm thinking about even traditionally published fantasy, that some of the reader favorites are like. Have you read Cassandra Clare?
I tried reading her Mortal Instruments book, but the whole the incest thing just grossed me out. I tried reading the Clockwork, was it Clockwork Princess, or that Clockwork series?
What's the first? Yeah.
I don't remember what the name of the first one was, but the same thing persisted. That weird, like, I just dropped her and was like, I can't read her. I'm just too creeped out. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of people, or the critics of her. I mean, I really appreciate her because she does a lot of diversity. But it is true, like, her critics, some of them are like, why does she always have these brother, sister, weird, creepy dynamic? Like, why is that? Why does that keep coming back? That really freaks me out. So I understand that. Yeah, that was not like I think this is the editor in me. I've learned to be able to read stuff, even if there's parts that I'm just like, I'll just sort of zone out of that part, and I'm just like, I'll read for the rest of the story and until this gets sorted. I've really learned to do that. And I think that's because of my editing work. Because I don't only edit works in my favorite genres, right? So sometimes you just have to look at the story and just, okay, in this genre, this goes. This is not what I like in a work, but I know that this genre appreciates these tropes, so I'm just gonna read through that. And so I think I can do that work as well. But why I mentioned Cassandra Clare is that two of her characters, Magnus Bane and Alexander Lightwood, they became very popular. So at one point, and especially Magnus Bane, I think, is a fan favorite. So he got his own, like, so then she did like short stories about him. And then there's also another character who, Simon, who people really enjoyed, and he also got like this collection of short stories about him, right? So yeah, but Magnus Bane is, I mentioned him because he's like the diverse, like he has Indonesian heritage, he is bisexual. I think he calls himself bisexual. Yeah, he calls himself a freewheeling bisexual, actually. So he doesn't use the word pansexual.
I don't think I got far enough in the series for that because I don't. I remember it being very whitewashed, the books that I had read, and the incest and it was like.
No, that's in book 6, I think. So the last book of the Mortal Instruments, yes. So that is so.
Book 1.
Yeah, but as an example, too, like, you know, some of those side characters become really important to people.
Yeah,
and I think they become important because people recognize themselves in them, right? And that's why they sort of like, this is why how fan fiction gets written, right? Because they're like, there's certain characters and they're just like, I want to read more of that, right? They're just on the side right now, and I just want to have more of that. So yeah, that's just like, you know, give them a bit, especially if your readers respond well to them, just give them a bigger part, right? Like, and if you're scared, do the research. There's hardly anything you cannot find online these days about how to represent, what is problematic about certain representations and why, what to avoid when you represent this kind of character. Like, there's so much online. Listen to the podcast. We even have it. I want to offer that to people. Sure. And I usually have that as if you sign up for my newsletter, you get this for free, but I just switched newsletter and I haven't set it up yet. So just email me and you get it, and you don't have to sign up for my newsletter, because we have a toolkit, the Doing Diversity in Writing Toolkit, and it has things from the Calm the Fuck Down checklist, which is like, what if you do write a character that's diverse and somebody has a negative comment on it, right? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, what's the step? What are the steps, right? How do you? So first you calm down, then you look at what you really do. But there's also a list like, okay, it's basically just a bunch of checklists, right? So and we've created that to help people get over that sort of fear of, okay, I'm doing this. So if you want that, email me. But I think you're going to put it in the show notes.
Yes, I did see in your email. So I added it into it because you hadn't given it to me when you filled out the form, which is totally fine. People forget things all the time, but it is in there. So,
yeah, because I think that should really help you. It gives you examples, it gives you questions that you have to ask yourself, like, okay, is this character doing this or that? Like, just to make sure you're not doing anything like perpetuating a stereotype that you really do not want to perpetuate and stuff like that. Or that you're creating new stereotypes as you go. That's, of course, also a danger. So I'm looking at the time. Do you want to go into fantasy, specifically fantasy?
Yes, let's definitely hit that.
Yes. Okay, so I think what I see a lot in fantasy writing is that no matter how different the world is, it's often still to a certain extent based on the world that we know. And that is very common because, like I already said, that like we write what we know, right? So even if we're critical about certain structures, these are so ingrained in us that it's really hard to write something that is completely different. To the extent that if we write something that is so different, we might not even recognize it as society anymore, right? So you have to have some rules and some guidelines and stuff. And a lot of this is sort of part of the subconscious, like the cultural collective archive that we have that we are not even aware of. So it's really important I think it's really important that we are conscious of that. Okay, so the world that we're creating, what are the parallels with our own world? And do I want these? Or are they sort of reproducing the inequality that we have in this particular world? So I have a couple of points. Like, I think that sometimes we forget that when you create a fantasy world, your world doesn't have to be separated along lines of race or ethnicity.
That's true. It can be socioeconomic.
It can be that. It can be anything. It can literally be anything. So you can create a world where skin color doesn't matter, not because everybody has the same skin color, but simply because it was never an issue, because there was never any racial inequality or hierarchy, right? So people can interact, they can procreate with each other without people gasping. It's just, there are no stereotypes. Everything can just, live alongside each other, right? Which is very idyllic. But similarly, like in your world, sexuality might not exist as a category, right? Like maybe nobody cares in your world who sleeps with whom, right? You can do that. You can create as many genders as you want, and you can also make the decision that all of these genders are equal. This is your world, right?
Mhm.
So you can if you want to turn stereotypes like on their head, you can do so, right? I would just say, indeed, like, do the research, know what you're doing, and also, like, don't counter one stereotype by accidentally enforcing another, because that's something that I see, right? Like, people are trying so hard to counter an existing stereotype that they just sort of like go overboard, and then they are actually perpetuating something else, which is equally, maybe not equally, maybe less harmful, but still problematic. So be careful of what the effect it is of the changes that you're making. And if you do want inequality, like, because I think most societies are like, we might we might not like it, but most societies will have some form of inequality. Make sure that in your writing you don't condone it, right? And that you don't perpetuate these stereotypes. And also that when you create certain when you create like certain species or groups, that you do not recreate them along the lines that we already have in our society. Like, what's an example of that? Oh, let's say like in your world there's different species, or maybe there's not even humans, but there are different species, and you have a slave race, right? What you see, and there's an example in the podcast. I don't know it's called Babylon 5. I don't know what it is. I've never. Oh, you say, okay. So apparently they have a slave race, but they have certain characteristics that have parallels to the Black community, right? So that's like, oh, okay, that's problematic. So if you do have a slave race in your world, be very careful that you don't characterize them along the ways in which Black people have been characterized or have been perceived by non-Black people, right? And what I would say what would be even better is not to have a slave race, right? If you need slaves, create a system where slaves can end up as slaves because they are criminals, or their family sold them for money because they're poor, or maybe they are in debt themselves, or right. There's different ways. It doesn't have to be inequality. Like I said, inequality doesn't have to be based on skin color.
Yeah.
Right.
In my world, is socioeconomic. It's
yes. Right.
If you want something you can't afford, you can indenture yourself, and then you are basically a slave. But unless you have unless you made this deal with somebody who's very corrupt, it is until your debt is paid, and it's worked out. There's a contract. How much labor you have to do and what sort of labor for how long in order to pay back this debt.
Yeah,
but
which
there
is
are
also
rules. There are rules. There's things you can and can't do while you're in this debt. You can't marry. You can't have children. You're basically a slave at that point. You're just working. But it has nothing to do with anything else. It is socioeconomic, and you could be rich one day and indebted to somebody else the next day.
But you can also be Black and gay and of a certain religion. That really doesn't matter. It's just about I want something that I cannot afford. So this is a choice that I make.
Yeah. It's all
So
socioeconomic. Yep. Go on.
yeah. So that is like, so you can have, if you want, and I understand wanting inequality in our world because that brings tension.
Mm.
Like we like writing books is creating tension and then solving the tension to a
Well,
certain extent.
I
So
did it not for that, but because in our world, like, people are so indebted. They're basically indentured to the people they have debts to. And like, it's just, I just, the way that, I don't know, maybe it's not elsewhere, but in the US, like, the, you know, you need a loan to go to college. You need a loan to get medical procedures. Like, you constantly have to take out a loan to do something. You want a car, you want a house. You have extra people coming over and you need more groceries. It's on the credit card. The credit card, every time you use the credit card, it's another loan. Like, we are a society of debt, and companies trade and buy and sell our debt. So I just took what I saw around me and was like, this is a horrible system. And like, where could it go in the future? And that's, indenture is something that was part of our history in the past. And I can't help seeing that, like, people who are just working to pay their debts, which I was for a long time, you know, because they don't teach you how to manage money in school. You know, I ended up very in debt, and I was working just to pay my debts and could do literally nothing else except survive and pay my debts. So when I was in a way indentured to my debt. So that's where that came from. Like, it was just my own experience, and just trying to call out that this is a horrible system. And everything is set up to encourage you to take more debt. You need a good, whatchamacallit, they actually give you a rate for like how much debt you have and how much, and that determines whether you can get this loan or not. Credit rating. It's all dependent on debt. Yes. And if you don't take out debt, your credit score goes down. The only way to keep your credit score up is to constantly take out debt and repay it.
Which is an evil system.
It is.
It is. It's yeah. I recently saw a meme about that. It's like, you know, that there's the three women are like comparing their credit score, and then one is like really sad because she has literally no debts anywhere, and so her credit score is 0. Yeah, and that limits you as well.
It does. It does.
Which is insane.
And the system is set up against people of, you know, that are immigrants, people that are not white and rich. If you're not white and rich, the system is totally against you. And you can't get out of it because you want to start a business, you have to get a loan. To get a loan, they check your credit rating. To have a credit rating, you have to have debt and be paying it. But that means you have to have the money to be, you know, to in order to do this, because when you first get a credit card, you have no credit rating. So you have to get the credit card, make small payments, pay it off, and build up a credit rating. Like, it's our whole system. Everything we do in life is based on credit here, and it's not good.
So the Netherlands. So this is again like another point I want to make is that if you're struggling to build a world that's like removed from our own, like our current social dynamics, right? You can go further back in history, and you're like we had indentured labor, right? Before our current capitalist system, right? So you can go further back because the way the world functions now, it hasn't always been the case, right? It's like I'm also thinking about the fact that on the African continent, like there were kingdoms, right, long before white people started creating villages and kingdoms themselves, right? So, but a lot of people don't hear about that, or they do not like it, because I don't think that's taught in a lot of schools.
Yeah, no, it's not. But nowadays they're doing amazing things with microloans and creating their own economies, because, you know, people don't want to invest in Africa, or I mean, some people do, but they're doing some really amazing things with their own, setting up their own little systems and using that to help people start, you know, businesses and employ people, and to help put back into their economy. So it is something to look into, is how they're doing things now, because that could be a good basis for, you know, instead of slavery and all that, look at what they're doing now with these microeconomies, and that could be a good basis of a fantasy world too.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, not just like look at what other people have been doing, back then, and when I say back then, I get 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but also indeed like, okay, and what are they doing now? Like, are there like in the Netherlands, it's do not have a system. If you go into debt, you are registered. And depending on how much you earn, you can only have this much debt. So that means if you are registered, the moment if you get a phone, and I think you get registered when you borrow more or you get a loan. So this is when you go to this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, I think, but just to show you the contrast, is when I go to a phone place, right, and I get a new phone, right? These things are expensive these days. So you can decide, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pay anything for the phone now, but I'm going to have that on my monthly bill, right? So I pay it off in like 24 months, right? If that amount that you're paying off is over 350 euros, I think it is, you get registered as having a loan. That immediately makes it harder to buy a house.
Oh,
just the fact that you're registered, right? So what they suggest, if you want to buy a phone, they say, okay, well, if you pay, let's say your new phone is 750 euros, right? I don't have Apple, so my phones are a bit more reasonable priced. So they would say, okay, so 750. If you pay 400 now, right, we can separate the 350 over 24 months, and you do not get the registration, because once you've been registered once, it's on your record. So if you then go for a mortgage, they will go, okay, what about this loan? Why do you needed it? So it's the exact opposite. It's a problem if you're on the register. So you try to stay off the register. So that's our version of credit score has the exact opposite. It's like, you've never had a loan. Oh, you must be so great managing yourself financially. How much do you want to borrow to buy this house? And of course, that depends on your income, of course. But like, the more types of loans you have, even if they're like small ones, they'll start, okay, we need to understand why this was necessary. Why couldn't you buy that? Stuff like that. So in the Netherlands, they're very like, if you don't need a loan, don't get one.
I see. I mean, here too, if you have too many loans, they don't ask you why you needed these other loans, but they look at your debt to income ratio and decide, can you make a payment, for this loan? And then we had those adjustable rate mortgages, which affected disproportionately lower income people of
obviously, because that's the system. And that's how the system is created.
Yeah, and there was this whole thing of foreclosures in the U.S. So like, and I lived through all of that, and that like heavily affected. That's why I went that route, because that's what I see, and I see the socioeconomics. Because I live in a melting pot, so I don't see the racism, and I'm sure it's here, and I'm sorry that I don't see it, and I'm trying harder to see these things, but I see the socioeconomic racism more often than anything else. I see, people that I work with who have immigrated to this company who have difficulty getting loans and things, have difficulty doing things that I don't have as much difficulty with. But I've also, my parents gave me a credit card when I was 18 to start building up my credit score. And then I ended up at 10K in debt because I did not understand how credit worked. So don't be me.
Yeah, but that's. But I
had a fantastic credit score.
So you can build a world in which the same idea happens, right? Like,
yes,
it's because this keeps the rich people very rich.
It does. It keeps people down.
It keeps people without power.
Yeah, and it's harder for them to organize because their only thing they have in common is that they're indebted, that they have this debt thing, but they have nothing else in common. They don't have anything religious in common. They don't have sexual orientation in common. They have nothing else in common except that they're living in this place and they're stuck under this system of debt and they don't have the same rights. They have less rights depending on where they fall in the socioeconomic thing So it's because I see that in the US, it is much harder for people to organize because a lot of what we have in common is this whole debt system. And so we get split along politics, along racial lines, along many other things. And maybe I'm misreading it, but like in my whole life living here, like that's what I've seen is like debt, this whole capitalist system and its reliance on trading debt and getting people to take out more debt all the credit card companies with their incentives to take out more debts. The freaking grocery stores have credit cards they want you to sign up for. And gas cards, because you get, 10 cents less on your gas card for a gallon of gas.
So in the Netherlands,
if you charge it on
no
their
such
card.
thing, right? Like, I think my mom might be able to get a credit card. Like, you have to have a certain income. The only reason I have a credit card is because I got one as a student, which was like a perk. And then they never took it back when my student account with that bank turned into like a normal adult account. They never gave it back. Or they never asked back for it. So I'm like, that's an oversight, because they should have. So I still have a credit card. But with my current income, I probably will not get one if I go to another bank, which is the reason why I'm still with I don't like my bank, but it's the reason I'm still with them, because I'm like, in this day and age, like, there's so many things you cannot buy if you do not have a credit card.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. You can't go to a car dealership and hand them cash. But if your credit card had a high enough limit, you could probably charge the car.
But also
you have to get a loan.
Also, a very standard credit card in the Netherlands has a limit of 500 to 1,000.
Oh, no. In the U.S., you can have a credit card. I was 21 years old, and American Express raised the limit to $20,000. I had to call them and fight with them to lower it. And I was like, I don't have a job. I'm going to college. I should not be able to charge a car on here. I had to fight with them for 45 minutes, and they finally lowered it to 10,000. And I was like, this is still too high. I'm in college.
So for us, it's common to have 500 or 1,000. And of course, like, if you have a certain income, you can then ask the bank to raise it, and they will do it if you can prove something. So it's the exact opposite.
American Express keeps asking me what my income is to raise it, and I keep telling them what my income was 20 years ago, because I don't want them to raise it.
Very good. Yeah. But isn't it weird that you have to sort of fight people who want to have more? But it's a fucked up system. Yeah.
It is. And it's so much a part of everything. Everything is loyalty programs. Oh, you have to be part of the loyalty program. You have to pay money, or you have to get their card. And you have to charge it on their card. You want the discounts at Macy's, you have to get the Macy's credit card. You have to charge the purchase on the Macy's credit card. But you have to have the coupon to get the percentage off. But you can only get the percentage if you have the Macy's card. And you're part of their loyalty thing that you pay money. Like, that's that. Welcome to the U.S. We're trying to get your money.
I remember when I saw the first ever episode of Friends, and I did not understand why she had so many credit cards.
Now
because in the Netherlands it's quite hard to get one. But to get back to what
it's so easy. It used to be so easy to get a credit card. You could get approved in 2 minutes while you're standing there waiting to pay and every single store you went into was trying to get you one, because the associates were given, you get paid your hourly, which sucks. It's not a lot of money. I used to work in retail, but you get a bonus for the amount of people who you got to sign up for the store card. So you were begging people to sign up for that store card.
It's such an evil system. So, but the thing is, like, so if you're a writer in the US, this might be the only system that you know. So not only go back in history and see what people did in other times, right? But also look at how other countries, like, even just talking with you now, like, the differences between how the Netherlands deal with credit cards and how the US handles with credit card, right? If you're from the US, you might not know that things are different elsewhere. So look into that and use, if you're struggling to be like, okay, how do I create a world that functions differently than the one I know? Because this is all I know. Like, these simple questions, like, okay, so how does credit score work in Belgium? In the UK, in whatever. How does healthcare work? Let's not start about the differences between Dutch.
But I don't want to talk about that. It makes me cry every time I think about it. But you can also take our broken system and fix it,
And this is like,
you can write about utopia and then just add dragons.
Worlds, when you build your own world, you can fix it.
Yeah.
Right. And so my only point is, when you fix one thing, make sure you don't break something else.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, they need a reason to go on the quest. Now they got to fix the other thing that's broken.
That is true. Or the quest is romantic in nature, which is not okay for you.
Okay, there's that
what I have, I don't have. So I have romance in all my, but that's just because
I I don't, and I honestly don't know what anybody's sexual orientation is, because they're
Which
on
is
an adventure. They got to find the dragon. They got to save the person. They got
no,
to stop
but
the
and
big
yeah,
bad.
I love that. Yeah, for me, it's more like, that they interact with each other. And one of my cats has decided that she wants some attention.
She wants to be a character in this story.
This is usually the one who comes to like, what are you doing, mommy? Can I have attention? But I have like, I do have like, as like, aside from their main job or the main quest, they will run into characters who they fall in love with and stuff like that. So for me, it's I once listened, I think it might still exist. God, what's the name of the podcast? They had these like 15-minute snippets. I can't remember. I think they called it elemental.
Mhm.
Elemental genres or something. So it's like you have your main genre. So for me, that is YA fantasy or YA/NA. So this big thing you see behind me, that is just a mix of this. Some people are like 17. Some of the main characters are like 17, 19. And then others are like 26, 28. So they're both. So I'm like, it's a bit of a mix. Some characters are experiencing the coming of age, and the others are like, one of them will go eventually through a bisexual awakening, right? So that's so there's still a coming of age kind of element to that. What was my point? Oh, yes,
You were talking about you
yes,
in your books, which is important. We are a podcast for readers too.
So the genre is not romance, right? It's like it's not. Maybe it's closest to urban fantasy, because even though
Okay.
the worlds are the existing world exists, and they sort of live semi-separate from it. They interact with it, but they do have their own culture, and their own practices and stuff like that. So it does exist, but they're having certain adventures. They have a particular role to fulfill in this series. In my other series, there is a quest, which is very much coming of age kind of questy, and so the romance is more like it's on the side. It's not the main thing. So this is what we call an elemental genre. Like you can also have a romance in which the romance is the most important, but it happens to be in a fantasy setting, and these days we call it romantasy. That just means like the romance is where you read it, but there just happens to be elves and stuff, or fairies, and maybe a dragon or other creatures as well, right? So that's how you.
Or maybe the love interest is a dragon.
I mean, I'm like, everybody's always into dragons. I'm like, I should read some of that
because they're dangerous, man.
No. Okay.
I mean, they're large and they breathe fire if they're angry. Well, some of them breathe fire.
Okay.
Not all of them do.
I once edited a novel that had dragons, but they had a really good relationship with the main character. So they weren't dangerous. Not in the eyes of the main character. They were not dangerous.
Right. I think.
And there's another novel I've edited. When was that? That's not that long ago.
And my dragons have agency.
They work with the humans, right? So they'll be dangerous to other people potentially, but they have this bond with a particular human, like from birth. When the dragon is born, they pick a human. So that's also, so I never think of them as dangerous in and of itself. It's like more they have to protect their human, right? But that's just a particular novels that I've edited.
And there's so many dragon books where the dragons are bonded to humans, but in my books, the dragons are free agents. So they're not bonded to anybody. They're pursuing their own goals, and they don't want to bond with people. They want to live their own lives and do their own things. They're their own characters. They're not.
So that's different. Yes, that's different. Yeah, but I don't think I've ever edited.
And they're not part of society either. They're there, and they can decide they don't like you.
I think I've read one series in which they have that. Yeah, you're right. Those dragons are a bit different.
And they're more interesting because they don't have to. They can. The heroes can be going off and doing something like, you know what? I don't agree with this quest. I think it's stupid. I'm not coming with you. And they could do that. They have free will, they have agency. And I think that's more interesting, than with the bond. We're like, oh, I must go with you. Like they tend not to have much personality.
It's also, when you talk about diversity and you want to extend diversity to the non-human human-like species, right? Is that you make this, it's less human-centric, right? If you have like dragons bond with humans, right? It's like the human is still the cent, even though like some of the dragons can teach the human a lot of things, right? It often, not always, but I have seen it happen that it becomes very human centric.
It does.
Right. Yeah. So that is like to have diversity and like to not create another who's less than you. That's the way to do it. Okay. Shall I go through my other points?
Yes. I'm sorry. I will stop diverting you.
I was looking at these. Okay, so a really important point is that I already mentioned own voices, which is like hashtag own voices. So those are stories written by people with certain identity markers, and they write about having these identity markers. It's not necessarily that it's like autobiographical, but it's their characters have similar identity markers than they have, right? So that's the one thing that's called own voices. So that's a trans author writing about trans characters, or a Latinx lesbian writing about Latinx lesbian main character, right? And I want to make it so this is, and I think there are people who are afraid to include more diverse characters as more like main characters, or even like characters that are more important to the story, because they're afraid because they don't want to create this sort of own voices thing, right? They don't want to speak for people with certain identity markers, and that's great, because you don't want to do that, right? What we do want to do is include more diverse characters in our work, and they will have their own struggles in their lives, and of course we should not ignore that. We need to be attentive to those struggles, but what we don't want to do is like end up in a situation where we speak for them and we speak about these specific struggles. So for me, I don't think I'm making myself clear. There's a difference between writing a story about someone and they're going on a certain quest, right? And they happen to be of color and a lesbian and deaf, right? That just happened to be the case. That is different than writing a story about her being a lesbian who is of color and who is deaf. Because in the first story, it's about the quest, and that just happens to be who she is, right? And that will come with certain struggles, but the main story is not about those struggles. When the main story becomes about her struggles as a deaf lesbian of color, then you are speaking for her, for those identity markers. That's when, if that is not you, if you're a white straight woman with no physical disabilities, you might want to stay away from that. But you can definitely have a main character who is not like you. I mean, nobody's main character is exactly like them, I would say. There's always going to be a little bit of difference. You just have to expand on the differences, right? And like I said, like it will be very ignorant if you ignore the struggles that these characters have because of these different identity markers. You don't have to do that. But you can acknowledge the struggles without the whole story becoming about the struggles. So let's say you can have a main character who is gay, but the story is not about their coming out and their how they're struggling in school and with their family, and maybe their family kicks them out and they have to move in with their best friend, right? That might be happening to them on the outside, but that is not what your main story should be about. Their main story might be about that they anything else, right? Whatever, let's say a 16-year-old, 15-year-old might have to deal with in a school situation, right? Maybe they want to play first guitar in the school band. Maybe that's the whole quest for them, right? But then on the background, right, maybe they're also coming out and their family's taking it really hard. So you can acknowledge that without it making it the whole story, the whole story arc is them coming out and then having to dealing with the consequences. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I get it. So the as long as the plot is about something else, you can have all the other
About
things in
anything
your,
that a character
yeah.
of that age and social class and whatever could be going through. Yeah.
So like so you could have the characters trying to save their family and whatever, and they along the way notice that one of their quest members is really attractive, and they just decide that this brings up questions, but they aren't going to deal with it right now. They're on this quest. They like this person. They're going to just keep it simple and be on the quest and like them. And that, I think something like that, to overly simplify it.
Yes, because like if the quest is saving your family from a financial ruin, right?
Yeah.
You can be a white boy, you can be a white girl, you can be a black girl, you can be a black boy, you can be Asian, like it's right. And yes, like you can be gay, you can be bi, you can be pan, you can be straight, you can be demisexual, you can be trans, you can be non-binary, you can be all of those things to go on the quest of saving. Like none of that prevents you
Right.
from being the person who wants to save the family from ruin. So your character can have all of that, they just happen to be transgender and black. But that's not what the story is about, right?
Yeah.
The story is about, okay, my family is in a financial situation, and I want to try and save them from that. And of course, they will have some obstacles on the way because of being a transgender black person, right? And you have to include that in some way, right? Like I said, like it's very ignorant.
Unless they're in a world that doesn't
Of course,
that doesn't see any problem with that, then they wouldn't. It's just this is who they are, and people just they might have a problem with them for being on a quest and going through somebody's backyard and or
exactly, like in my one of my in my
accidentally trespassing on sacred ground, like things that normal things people run into on quests.
Yeah, but like in one of my worlds, not the one behind me, but in my other one, like sexuality is very who cares.
Yeah.
There's one character who cares, and then it's very clear that the other characters are like, why do you care? Right. And then there's also like I have some non-binary characters, I have some trans characters, and I make it very clear in my story that in their particular community, nobody cares. Oh, those are your pronouns? Perfect. Right? Nobody's making mistakes. Like it's completely like there's nothing. So yes, you can both acknowledge their existence and show, okay, this is what it would be like if nobody cares whether you're trans or not, right? Yeah, so that is and like I said, like so their story arcs, like even if they're like side characters, like of these because every secondary character is on their own quest, right? So I
they're
also
the hero of their own quest. We might not get that story, but in their mind, they're the hero.
Or we might, if our readers are persistent enough.
That's true.
So for these characters, they're not in the story because I have something to say about their journey as a transgender, right? That's not their personal issues in the story have to do with other stuff that have nothing to do with the fact that they're trans.
Right.
Yeah, they're just
maybe they're carrying the sacred relic that nobody else wants to carry because they drew the short straw and they're complaining about it.
They're basically trans because when I created this character, I flipped a coin. Are they cisgender? Are they trans? Oh, they're trans. Okay, great. Are they trans or are they transgender or are they non-binary? Flip a coin. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, right? Like how do you do transgender in like a second world fantasy is what I would be wondering. Because I think that can get kind of sticky because we don't have a lot of the things that we have here. And I've read some books that I know we're not good representations of that.
So are you talking things we have here, like as in a medical transition?
I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure exactly. Like how would you do in any regard, like as an example, because that's something that like I'm not sure how you would do that in like an epic fantasy kind of world where like maybe I mean there is healing magic and stuff, but
oh yeah, you create the world, so you can add that if you want. But also I think we have to acknowledge But there
Right.
are a lot of trans people. Like it used to be, if you wanted to have like a medical transition, it used to be for a very long time, like until quite recently, actually, you would have to go like all the way
Hmm.
in order to get insurance, right? But I know a lot of people who were like, but that's not what I need. Like, what I want is, I just want to get rid of these boobs. Like, then I will feel much better about my body, right? So there are a lot of transgender people who don't need the whole transition. Some of them never medically transition, right? They just present themselves to the world. So you can play with that as
I
well,
see. I see. I didn't know that because
right?
yeah. I
There's
only
so
see them
so
on television. I don't actually know any. Unfortunately, I don't know any transgender people in real life. All I see is what I see on television. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would say that when you see them on television, like if they do not have the medical transition, they're usually there to as like a point of ridicule, right? Or as a shock factor. But in a lot of cases, just in individual lives, right? People
Yeah.
never make the full transition because they don't feel the need, right? That's not the case. Some do, right? Some want the full transition. Some never even start the full transition. That could be that can be a socioeconomic reason, right? That can be because they
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
afford it, but it can also be because them just being able to dress in different clothes. And so some people just do hormones, and that
Hmm.
changes enough of them that they're like, okay, so I don't need the rest. That's fine. I'm perfectly happy the way I am right now. But for the longest time, the only way to get even started on hormones when doctors thought you're gonna, because it's a very binary system which we live, right? You're either this or that.
Hmm.
So if you're saying you're not this, then you will have to become this. So if we start on this trajectory, you have to end up there. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So that's been I think we're moving away from that.
I see. So it's more of a spectrum. I see.
I think yes, and that can have different reasons. Like that could be have socioeconomic reasons. Maybe somebody had one of the surgeries done and was like that was too painful. That was too traumatic. I'm never doing that again. So I'm just going to accept the rest of my body for what it is.
Hmm.
Because so there's different reasons. Some people are like completely happy. It's the same reason that not all non-binary people change their first name
Hmm.
to be sort of unisex.
I think,
Because
and a
they're
lot of
like, I
names.
like my first name. I just want you to call me they them.
Yeah.
Even if my
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
first name is incredibly masculine or feminine.
But I know women who have names that are very masculine who are not trans or anything. It was just their mom
Right?
liked that name. I mean, there are celebrities name their kids Apple and Fig and Fern, and so I think the name thing. I think there's a lot more latitude now on that because
Yeah. We we
look at
we
what
we do have
Hollywood's doing.
we did do an episode on naming, by the way. Yeah. We
Oh,
did talk
okay.
we did talk about this. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one point. Another point, really important, is that if you're now thinking, I have my world, I do not know how to add diversity, right?
Mhm.
Um, you don't have to force diversity where it does not make sense in your world, right? If you have a world and it's based on this particular mythology, and those people that you're basing it on were like extremely racially homogenous, right? That can happen
Mhm.
depending on how isolated they were in the world. Otherwise, they probably would have come into contact with other people. You can, of course, still add racial diversity because it's your world. So if you want to mix that up and just, break it open and create an alternative, you can do that. But if you want to honor the original sort of people that you're basing your story on, you do not have to force it. Like I already said, there's so many different ways of doing diversity. Think about other ways of adding diversity, and it's very much based on your setting. Like if you're writing adventure stuff, right?
Mhm.
It will not
It's
make
family
sense.
and friendship centric. Yeah.
Yes, but it will probably not make sense for you to have a very important character who's on your quests be have a disability.
Actually, my main character, who's been in 20 something books, has a disability.
But what kind of disability?
he lost most of his hearing in one ear, and he's also epileptic. He has
Okay, yeah.
episodes
I was
in
more
every single
thinking.
book. He
Okay.
does too much, so it knocks him down and it knocks him out. Not always at points of the plot where it would be helpful. Sometimes
Of
it's
course
always at
not.
the
No,
worst
no.
possible situation, and I'm like, God, am I going to save him now? He's my favorite character, so it
No,
doesn't
but
make
I
it
mean,
easy for me.
but I meant like if you then have a person who should be using a wheelchair or whatever
So
equivalent in your,
his brother has mobility issues and uses crutches, and adventures with him.
Okay, so you can make it possible, right?
Oh yeah.
But I'm saying that if certain things do not work in your world, you do not have to force it.
Mhm.
Just look at, okay, so but what can I add? What diversity can I make happen within this already existing world of mine?
I mean, and
Right?
sometimes the characters choose that for you. Like, I didn't choose this for those characters. They decided this is how they are, and I just have to live with it and figure out how
But
we
so
save them.
they knew that it was possible in that world.
Yes, anything's
Yeah.
possible in this world. That's why
Yeah.
I've
But
written
that's
so
why
many books
so
in
because
it.
because I've had that question, right? I have that
Yeah,
question from people like, okay, but I cannot add this. And then I'm like, I need to keep reminding you that diversity is not just like race and ethnicity,
yeah.
right? Like you can say, okay, I'm writing about some Celtic, like my books are very Scotland based, which is what my dad's from Scotland. So I could then say, okay, but where do I put Muslims in there, right? If I was writing something that happened back then, right? I actually have Muslims in my worlds, but that's because it's contemporary setting. It's just
Yeah.
like a society within a society.
But I mean, it
Um,
depending on when you go back to, they were in Spain. I mean, Spain ain't all that far from
and
Scotland, and
also like,
people were moving around the
but
earth,
also the
back in the
Celts
day.
moved. The Celts were also touched upon Spain.
Yep.
Right, so they could have easily interacted. You're right, but just as an example, right? If you have this very particular, but you might not want to include Muslims who are Islamic, like who believe in the Islam, as people who believe in the same gods as the Celts did, right? So you might not be able to include them in that particular religious order,
Mhm.
right? Of course, there are secular Muslims. That's definitely a thing. People do not seem to understand that happens. So you could play with that as well, of course. But just to say, like, if it's set somewhere and people have never really set foot there, or these people were known to be extremely homogenous in terms of ethnicity, like you do not have to force certain things, right? But just play with their sexualities and with their abilities, like mental and physical. Give them different traumas, right? Both physical, mental. Give them different hobbies and interests, stuff like that. You can go crazy. Do you want me? Because I thought maybe it would be useful if I gave some examples from my own books, but maybe we've
Sure.
been talking for too long. I don't know what you're
No, you
timing.
can. No, I think examples would be useful. I think that would be good.
Okay, so you do have to no, and I already said that. Like, so my world is set in contemporary world, mostly set in Scotland because that's like part of my heritage. But like these worlds are semi-separate from it, so they do interact. So my first world. So I work on two different series, right? The first world, they don't have electricity, for example, in their own community, but they can adapt certain appliances that will then work with their magic, so they can charge. So they are very big on electric cars, for example, because they can charge them themselves, right? They will not drive any cars that need gasoline, right? They don't. But they can also like use hoovers in that way, for example, or even like CD players or MP3 players. They can't use phones. So in my world, even though it's contemporary, people have MP3 players again. And they'll have a kid who lives outside of the village who's not magic, but does visit the village, the town. If they need new music, they ask this character who has like a computer at home to just upload new music on it for them, right? So they have this little bit of a connection. And then my second world, they will use electricity, but they are a very environmental friendly gang. That's kind of their, they kind of protect every being who lives beyond the veil, They can see beyond the veil. So they can see all the Scottish mythological creatures, and they protect them. So it's also, I turned, like, usually we hunt the monsters and we protect the humans. And in my stories, it's like we protect the mythical beings from
Well, they
the
must be
humans.
endangered by now.
Exactly. So in this series that you see here, they protect the beings beyond the veil. From humans who do not understand, right? So I take Scottish mythology, and every creature who's said to be scary and stuff, I give that a reason. Oh, they were attacked, so it was self-defense, right? That's kind of how I'm trying to shake things up. So they're very environmental conscious, right? Because they realize, okay, because of the way that we've expanded, like the humans have expanded, like these creatures, and also beings like the Fae, for example, they have lost so much ground, right? And they just want to live in their forests, and they hardly can't. And then so they run into people, or they get upset, and then they attack the humans, and then, so they have to intervene. So they use solar energy and hydropower and the wind and stuff, right? When they can, they try to be as environmental conscious as possible. And with the first world, I started that when I was 14. That's when I had the first idea, right? So, and I'm a very slow writer. And I also penned the first book, and I'm now trying to figure out how the plot actually functions. So I had to layer in all that diversity, because when I was 14, I wasn't as conscious of the injustices in the world and the inequity. So I had to layer all that in. My other world, so the one you see behind me, those characters were diverse. They came to me in their full diversity, right? So in my first world, my main character is pansexual. She's a white girl, and she's been in therapy for most of her life. And she has both her parents, they're Welsh and English. She's an only child. And this is where I said, I have a lot of bisexual characters. So one of my secondary characters, she's bisexual, she's biracial, she has a hearing aid. So she's a girl, she's bisexual, she is biracial, and she has a hearing aid, right? So that's already four different ways in which she's different from the norm, right? She also has two mothers, and one is English and the other one is from Senegal. And then I have a white boy who is bisexual. He has a pacemaker, and he has glasses, which he hates wearing. His brother also has glasses. He doesn't understand why his brother is so upset, because he would never wear contacts. And then they have an older brother, and he's like extremely gay in my story. And then there's the love interest of my main character, who's half Scottish, half Italian, right? So it's still Western, but it's still a mix. And he too turned out in my last draft to be bisexual. And then he's been like a real introvert his entire life, but his mother passed away just like a year before the book starts. And so he's become almost a recluse, right? So his friends are trying to get him sort of out of that. And he also grew up way too fast, because now he's his dad's caretaker. And he also suffers from a life-threatening illness, which is like my main character is trying to figure out what that is about, and nobody wants to tell her. And then I have somebody who's half English and half Pakistani, and her dad is from Pakistan, and he's like really famous, like he's a really famous architect, right? And he's in a wheelchair. And then, like I said, I have some non-binary characters. My main character has a crush on one of the non-binary characters in the second book. She meets this person in the first book, and then my main character's cousin between book 1 and 2. Like in book 1, we meet them as one, right? And we already know that this person is not a representative of their gender, right? But then in book 2, when they arrive at the same town, because that's where their school is, right? They go to a particular academy. They've had over the summer, they've started their sort of their transition in terms of how they represent themselves to the world. So if you don't know the book, and you don't know the books because I'm still writing them, you're like, but just to give you some ideas about
Are any
how
of
you
them
can
published?
No, none of them are published. Because
Oh.
I'm also very much, I want to write them all first. Maybe with the 15 book one, I want to write. So there's 3 different story arcs, and then there's like one over, right? So those books came to be in 5. So first the first 5, and then I was like, oh wait, there's another 5. Oh wait, there's another 5. So then there's like this huge. So I might actually start publishing that. when I have the first 5 at least outlined properly.
Mhm.
I'm a plotter these days, because I do not like the idea that I have to go back.
Mhm.
So I'd rather write them. I am thinking, because I'm working on the 6th draft of one of my books now, of putting in something like Ream for free, like unbeaten, to just give people just to read it to see what the feedback is.
Mhm.
Because I'm quite done with people not reading these particular stories because I've spent so much time on them. So this other world has like a gay Selkie, and
Oh,
then
that's fun.
a Scottish white guy who has a bisexual awakening because of the Selkie. And then there's a
I
Chinese
mean, that's
pansexual,
totally understandable.
right? I mean, Selkies are like beautiful people, right? And so this, and by the way, this guy is not the Scottish white guy is not who took the Selkie's seal skin, right? Like,
But he wishes he did.
no, 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 no. The whole series is about this, is about the sealskin and getting it back. And then what is the Selkie gonna do?
Swim away.
Dun, 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 you're gonna find out in book 7 or 8. So I have a Chinese non-binary person who's pansexual. I have a Scottish white girl who's pansexual and demisexual, and she has non-epileptic seizures, which indeed are not always useful in their line of work, because there's a lot of stealth and weapons going on when they're trying to save certain mythical creatures from
It's even
humans.
worse when you are like the powerhouse mage of the group and you are the one suffering from epileptic
Yeah, okay. So I don't know. So these are all, like,
It
except
is.
for the Selkie, they're all
It makes the
humans,
plot
right?
so complicated sometimes, but I love him,
Yeah.
and this is what he decided. So
I
love
don't
that.
have to, because these are all sort of like humans plus. They're like blessed by
Mhm.
the Fae to have the sight
He's
and
just a
to do
mage.
this work. Yeah, he should know better.
He
But so I also
decided
have, yeah.
this. He gave himself a really rough background too.
But that
So
is like, we do make their lives hard, right? So for
I'm
example,
trying to make his life better because I feel really bad. He had a really hard start, but he's
isn't it amazing? Because I know I work with authors who struggle being mean to their characters, and I'm like, maybe they should listen to how badly their characters want to be screwed up before they, like, um, before things get better, right? Because the worse it is, the better it gets, right? So I have a couple of twins, and they lost their parents in a car accident prior to the start of the series. So in that car accident, the girl, who's Scottish and white, lost both her hearing and her use of her legs, so she's now in a wheelchair. And her brother got severe lung damage because the fumes, the car was on fire. Yeah, I'm just like, so he has days that he cannot get out of bed.
this is awful. Those car fires.
I was really looking like, what can I give him that is different than what his sister suffered through, but it's still very debilitating, and I'm still gonna
Especially,
present him
yeah,
as a
if it was,
guy.
yeah, especially if it was an electrical vehicle, because the I was watching a thing on that, like you can throw an electric car that's on fire in the ocean and it won't stop burning. Like, putting those fires out is you have to use more caustic chemicals, like the fumes. I was watching I don't remember what I was. There was, you follow those rabbit holes and the internet searching. You end up on things that have nothing to do with where you started. You have no idea how you ended up here. You have no way to use this information, and you're just like,
Well,
you're
now
just sucked into it.
I know now that you saw this, so that now I am thinking, electric cars actually make sense for them because they generate their own energy.
Yeah, but they're very
There's-
dangerous if they
Yeah,
should catch
but
on fire or something. You cannot, they're very difficult to put out. You need special stuff.
so
So,
this is how, like, because I was thinking that she gets thrown out of the car and he gets stuck, and that's how he gets the lung damage.
yeah, that's
So
possible.
it will be an electrical car, which already makes sense for this world because, like, they have a van which has like solar
Yeah.
on it. Yeah. So and then I have a Scottish. So these are all just the main, the main characters and the most important secondary characters. So there's more, right? I have a
Mhm.
Scottish non-binary white lesbian, 2 of the groundkeepers, like they live on this estate that was gifted to them by the Fae. So two of the groundkeepers are like a Cypriot English gay couple. And then I have a Scottish black bisexual girl. There's a Muslim policewoman. And my main characters, two of them are brother and sister, and they have three parents. And by choice, nobody knows. So there's two men, one woman. Nobody knows whose dad is whose. But that's by choice. So that's like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give you some ideas on how you can create different ways of different diversities.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about the toin cost, right? Like, are they trans, are they cis? Like, if it doesn't, if they could be anything and it doesn't really matter. Like if you're writing a character who is straight, right? You cannot really flip a coin on their love interest unless you're open to having like a bisexual awakening moment, right? But if you have moments where you can flip a coin because it really doesn't matter, right? If they're a woman or a man, or whether they're trans or cis or black or white, right? Then you can use that. And there's actually an episode in which we interviewed Claire Sager, who writes romantasy. And she actually does that for her roles. Like, she tosses dice. So she's like, okay, does it matter here? Like, do these things matter for the plot or whatever? No. Okay, so let's see. I'll just, roll some dice and see whether they're guys or girls or in between, what they do for a living. So I love that, right? Like, if it doesn't, and if you find yourself struggling to make these decisions because you cannot get out of your own thinking, work with something like that, like flip a coin, roll some dice, and let them decide like what identity markers particular characters have. That's what I wanted to share today.
This has been awesome.
It's been a lot, I think.
But it's been fun, We talked about
because this is a very serious topic.
Yes.
But I'm like, and I know a lot of people feel a lot of trepidation because they're very scared of doing it wrong. And I'm like, but you can have so much fun.
Yes.
And like, when you're doing the research, you learn so much about how the world has been, which means what's possible for our futures, what you can build your own worlds on. Like, I mean, I love this stuff, so I think it's fun. I'm like, if you do things like, roll a dice, toss your coins, right? You can make this a really fun, exciting, okay, what can I add? Like, how can I make them different from each other? Like, it's another quest. You should just see it as a quest.
Yeah, I like that. And I like your points about that, it goes beyond race. It's so many things.
It doesn't matter how often I keep repeating that. People keep coming back to me, but I'm afraid to write about.
Well, I think
Asian
I know.
Characters.
I think I know where they got that from, because on TikTok in the writing thing, all they talk about, at least before I removed TikTok from my phone, a lot of the diversity talk was around race. There was very little and around race and their sexual orientation and their but a lot of it was race. They did touch on the LGBTQ plus. I'm missing some letters.
Oh, you can go. This is like, I love, like, there's so many acronyms.
I love that it's a spectrum. So the spectrum.
Yeah. Yes. The umbrella.
The umbrella. Okay.
Yeah.
I always miss a few letters. But forgive me for that. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm hungry. So my brain is a few words short at the moment.
It's 9:30 p.m. for me.
Oh wow.
I could say LGBTQIA plus.
That's it.
One of them. Now there's more, actually. You can go longer than that.
Oh, okay. But yeah, and I think it's a good reminder that it's also, it's also physical, disabilities. It is also
but also things we don't think, like, we are both wearing glasses.
Yes. I don't ever think about that, because I've been wearing glasses since I was 15.
But I go, this is only because I'm looking at a screen. I have perfect eyesight when I look
I wish.
in the distance. But
No.
I get really tired and I get lots of headaches if I read and look at screens. So it's almost like it's my reading glasses. Like I'm getting old.
Oh no, these come off, and if it's not here, I can't see it. If it's not right in front of my face, it's
No, I
total,
don't.
absolute. When I first got glasses and I walked outside, I didn't know that everyone around me could look down and see individual grass blades. Or look up at a tree and see individual leaves. I had never been able to see that without glasses.
You know
I
what?
did not know that is. So I have a scene in one of my books where my characters, his eyes glow, so he's used to seeing the world with a green cast. So things are magenta. Things are green shifted. Sometimes they look more magenta if they're wearing red or something. And his eyes suddenly stop doing that because they hate it. His magic hates water, so it burrows into him and disappears. His eyes don't glow when he's in water. So he's looking at the world. It looks radically different from what he's used to because he's used to everything color shifted, and it's not. And he's just freaked out by it because he's like, this is not normal, but it actually is normal. And that is from my experience with glasses.
I had that with a friend who eventually got glasses, but without being aware of how much she needed glasses.
Yeah.
And so we were driving together somewhere. So she was wearing the glasses for the first time, and she's like, "It is bizarre. I mean, I feel that these glasses,
like the world is coming at you."
But she's like, "I feel that these glasses make me see more than normal people do." And I said,
had the same feeling.
And she said, "Why? What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I mean, I look at this tree, and this tree. I mean, I can see all the individual leaves. That's just insane."
Yep, that was my reaction.
So I was like, "But I see that," and she was just in shock because she really thought that her glasses gave her more than 100% eyesight. And I'm like, no, like people who do not read glasses, who are not what's it called, farsighted. Is that it?
Yeah, no, that's the word. Yeah.
They're
I totally understand.
But she was shocked because she's like, I've never seen individual leaves on a tree. I said, well, that means that you've always, but I'm like, but that means you've always needed glasses, and now you're almost 30, and this is when you're getting them.
I was 15 when they finally realized I'd memorized the eye chart and sent me for glasses.
But it was not. So in her case, it was not that bad, right? And when it got to a point where she realized she couldn't read street names,
I could never read them. I didn't know you could read them.
Yeah. So, but for her, it was like when that happened, she was like, I need glasses. But she'd never seen like that. That you can see from afar. You can see like the different leaves. That's just insane to her. And I'm like, I can still see them. And that was so she was like, oh wait, so I've always had bad eyesight. I'm like, bingo. But she was that was beyond, because it was good enough.
I knew that I always had bad eyesight, but I didn't know what I was missing because I don't think I ever had good eyesight. I just didn't know, because when I went, they're like, how are you walking around? Because it was like in the 300s, my vision.
But so this is when we talk about diversity, right? This is another, like, people with glasses have glasses for different reasons. Right?
That's true.
So you can also have that, like I wear them, and worst case scenario, if I lose my glasses, if I'm working, I just get headaches sooner, right? If you lose your glasses, if you break your glasses, you have a serious problem, right? So this is another thing. So it's not the same for everybody. It's the same with people who have hearing aids. Some people are completely deaf without them. For other people, it's just something to amplify the sound. Right, so there's all these, like, even if you pick, there's a diversity within a diversity marker.
No, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so you have, even if you say, okay, I give them this, right? Like you can have mobility issues. What is the cause? Is it always the case, or like, can you do crutches? Do you need a wheelchair? Do you always need a wheelchair? Or like, let's say you've maybe it's a nerve thing. Right, so at certain points, maybe depending on the position you had while you were sleeping, the nerve got, stuck again, or whatever that's called, pinched, and then you wake up and you realize, oh, no use of my legs today. Well, that can be an hour, that can be 3 days. I just don't know. Right, or are you paralyzed from the waist down? There's completely different gradations. Right, so you can include that as well.
That's true. Soren's brother doesn't always need the crutches, but if he's going to be doing a lot of walking, then he needs something. Otherwise,
support.
he'll be in pain. Yeah, he can still walk. He'll just be in a lot of pain. And sometimes his nephew was like, well, I don't want to climb things, so you're going to carry me. And he's like, no, I can't. I can't carry you and deal with mobility aids that I need so that I'm not in pain. You're just going to have to take the stairs, kiddo.
But this is one of my characters is a pacemaker, right? But I consciously decided that he is like some people, like my landlord has a defibrillator. I hate that word, right? Because a pacemaker didn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And a defib needs different care, right? So I decided I'm going to give this character a pacemaker, but I'm also, maybe I'll do it later in the series, but for now I'm like, that's just a fact, and people only know because like when they go swimming, there's like a scar, but otherwise you do not know because everything works perfectly. Now he has the pacemaker, right? And it's like I know someone from when I was working retail. I had no idea that the guy had a pacemaker until one of my brother's friends had a relationship with him, and apparently, if she put her head on his chest, she heard the ticking.
Oh wow!
That's when she realized he had a pacemaker. So I'm like, okay, so you can live I'm certain that at some point you have to have it replaced or something or whatever. So, but
or
for
adjusted.
but for my character, I just gave that to him. I don't think it's going to be a big problem for him ever, but just giving that to him and just so people know, okay, there's this like important secondary character, and this is just part of who he is.
He might also be on heart medication, also, and needs to go to doctors for that, and that could show, could have to bow out of something because he has to go to a cardiologist appointment.
I might add, like, it's not a thing in the first book, but I might add it. I might add it to another book, and they don't live where the most of the story is set. Is like in this sort of in their sort of place where only magic people come.
And the magic doesn't affect, because usually it's magic or technology. They don't work together. There's
no,
problems.
My magic is elemental based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of mine is too.
Yeah, so it's not a problem. It's not a problem for him. But yeah, he will, of course, when his mother doesn't live in the city. His mother actually lives in a town that's mixed, so has magic people and non-magic people. Mm-hmm. So there will be the hospital. So yeah, I might at some point add that something does happen, and he needs to go to an appointment, and he can't go like in the summer or in the winter when he's at home. Right? It's a very simple thing, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. He might schedule his appointments in the summer and the winter, but what if one of his doctors cancels? And then now he suddenly has to leave their magic city. And so there's like, where is he? And it can be a minor thing, right? It doesn't have to be a big thing for the plot. Just like, oh, where is he? Oh yeah, no, he had to get his medication adjusted.
Just
so
check,
he got home. Yeah. Love that. I'm gonna add that.
Yeah, because if you have some medical device, you usually, my mom has to get her hearing aids adjusted. My sister was diabetic and had to get her pump adjusted and the insulin dosages adjusted. So I can imagine with something like a pacemaker that's inside you, that you would have to go, every so often, maybe every year, every 6 months, who knows, or you may have to go, he may be cleared for a whole year, but if there's watching something, it may be every 6 months.
Yeah, so he might and then so for him, so his parents are divorced, so maybe that's why he cannot go to his dad for the whole winter, because the hospital, his doctor is near his mom's village.
That's
but like
true.
You said, like my character with the hearing aids, right? So this particular world doesn't have electricity. But if they adapt certain things, they can use magic, right? So she'll be very happy when she gets permission to do magic, that she can now finally charge her own hearing aids, the battery in her own hearing aids, right? Because she's always dependent on other people to charge these really tiny devices, which needs a lot of concentration.
It's only recently that hearing aid batteries became rechargeable. My mom was telling me that. She's had hearing aids for, God, most of my life. And it was, you had to just buy packs of batteries because there was no way to recharge them. They're these tiny little things. But her new hearing aids have the batteries are rechargeable. And she was so excited. She's like, I don't have to keep buying things. I can just put them in a charger and it will recharge them every night. She was so happy because it's really hard when you're out somewhere and they die and the batteries are very tiny to try and find them. You're scrambling to put it in, and she's lost it many times. And then and the hearing aids can be very helpful if you're in a crowded situation, because they're tuned to pick out the voices, so and to tune out some of the background noise. You can hear what people are saying, so she's very reliant upon them out and about. And one ear is like almost deaf, the other one has more hearing. So yeah, like that's a new thing. Like she was telling me about that a couple of weeks ago. She was so excited that they'd never been. I don't know when it came out, but that she was finally eligible to get one. That
so is it rechargeable. So it's a completely different hearing aid.
Yeah, because you I don't know how insurance would work where your characters are in, because that'd be, I guess they're dealing with NHS, but in the US, most plans you get the hearing aid and you have to keep it 5 to 7 years. So you go back and get it adjusted each year. They'll pay for that. Or they clean it, they check the volume and see if they have to adjust it for you. Because for a long time, it wasn't adjustable. But one of the previous ones she had, she could have actually adjusted it herself with a computer app. But this latest one that she's getting, that she just puts it in the charger and it recharges. And she was so excited about that because
my mom was visiting. So my mom is in the Netherlands. I'm in Cyprus. So my mom was visiting last month, and she went, I knew I brought extra batteries. And
that was my mom. And she trying to find them because they're very specific and not everywhere sells them.
No, luckily, because I was like, my mom was like, what do I do? And I said, Mom, like, let's first see if the pharmacy has them here.
Yeah, or if they can get them. Usually they can.
And otherwise, like, because this is the thing, like, every month I get a leaflet, like a flyer from like hearing aid companies, different ones, right? So that's very few people still use like they bring flyers to the house, right? That's that I think that's a dying thing. But the ones I still get are from different hearing aid companies, right? For some reason, big thing in Cyprus. So I was like, Mom, there's probably one now, or like I have some people in my building who are only here in certain seasons, so they live elsewhere, and this is like their holiday. So I'm like, I can also check their mailbox, like their letterbox, and see if they have one of those. And yes, of course. So we had one of the. So it's like, if the pharmacy doesn't have it, we'll drive to the city, and we'll see if they. But she just walked in, told them, and then they even have the same color coding as they use in the Netherlands. So it was actually. But she was like, "What do I do?" And it was actually, she was in 3 minutes in and out, but like.
And it's such a relief. Yeah, because you become reliant on it, especially like when traveling, to be able to hear the announcements, and to know what to do, where to go.
Because she couldn't find them, and she's like, I know I put them somewhere, and she's like, at the end, she still hasn't, like.
They're so small. They're so easy to get lost.
They come in. I don't know how they work, but here they come in like a package, like a circle.
Mm-hmm.
So this, like, you have this whole. It's almost like a birth control thing, but a bit smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what my mom's were.
Yeah, and my mom never takes that thing off, so she always have the entire carton. I think because otherwise it gets really small. So she usually has the whole thing in her purse, and she went crazy. Like, where are they? Because you're so dependent on it.
Yes.
So I could, of course, because the charging in my world, like, is very specific, right? Mm-hmm. So I could have when this girl gets her magic for the first time, that she's like over enthusiastic, and maybe she burns one of them.
I mean, that's entirely possible. They're very, like, even they're delicate, and if you're not using, that would be a danger, because if you're when you plug something in, the plug is handling any conversion of current and making sure that only the right amount is getting to it to charge it at the right rate.
Yeah, so charging something that is this small.
Yeah,
and this is And
if
like
you're figuring it out yourself because there's no chords, you could send too much. Like it would be a delicate balance, I would think.
And I think it would be a fun addition, because, especially because this character. So this is again like your how you deal with your diversity also depends on your character's personality. So in my world, like there are people who are like, being able to do magic is what makes you belong to this community, and other people are like, you know what, like being part of this community is about so many things, like how in touch you are with nature and stuff like that. Like it's there's more to it than just like, you know, waving a wand around and being able to do magic. She is very much in that doing magic is what we're here for.
Mhm.
So she's very over. She's from best like top of the class, right? Very competitive. Not about all her other classes. She couldn't care less, right? But magic is the thing. So if she then goes like, I have permission now, I can do this myself, and she goes in her over eagerness, she then burns one of her hearing aids. That would actually be funny.
Yeah.
As in, it fits her character.
Right,
she
right.
would be like, you know, I can do it myself now, and I'm the top of my class. And then she has to wait. She has to wait a while because, of course, she has to order a new one. Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like
It'd be
that.
easy to do because, you know, other people are probably charging the normal range of batteries, and hearing aid batteries are not like that. They're very specific.
And this is my this is my thing in my world, right? It's easier to charge a car than, for example, so my main character does a lot of running to help with her mental issues. So her dad, when she leaves, her dad gives her his old MP3 player, right? Because she cannot use her phone in that world. So it's the story already knows is that it's a very small thing, right? So you have to be very careful. Maybe ask a more experienced person to charge this thing for you. And of course, a hearing aid is even smaller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody
who
can control the flow and send just a little.
If you've just gotten permission to do magic outside of the school setting,
yeah,
I love that. Oh, I'm gonna use that. So you can. This is so just, and I if people are still listening or watching.
I mean,
these are just these are all just ways, and this is it doesn't have to be a big plot thing. She will just be a bit more grumpy probably, and I have to be sure that when they always go to a particular pub on Fridays, that's like their social thing. If of course she's only wearing one hearing aid, I have to add in that they have to keep like, no, look this way, right? Because I need to be talking into that ear. And maybe so you have to, so you bring it in, right? You cannot have her like act completely normal when she's without one of her hearing aids, when she's that dependent on them.
If they need to talk to her, they play musical chairs so that they're sitting on the side where she can hear them, especially if they're like good. Like that's what we end up doing with my mom, is that we need to talk to her. She's like, no, the good ear. So we have to switch chairs and come talk to the good ear, which one of my characters hearing issue, that's a thing too. And his son is he's figured out which is the good ear because he wants to be heard.
But this is the thing again,
side,
right?
He's like, not going to talk to you now.
This isn't going to influence my plot. It might slightly alter the character arc because, you know, in the future she's going to be more careful, right? And then maybe she's going to have sort of like a victory dance when she's finally is able to do it herself, right? When she finally dares to try it again.
It could affect the plot if you don't like what people are saying and you just don't tell them, especially if many hearing aids now are small. Like if they don't look inside your ear, they don't see it's there. There's nothing outside of it.
Yeah, for
or it's very tiny, or your hair is covering it.
For plot purposes, hers are a very specific, vibrant color.
Okay.
But that's for plot purposes.
Because in my book, which is Epic Fantasy World, we don't have hearing aids, and everybody knows that he has lost hearing in one ear, and sometimes when he doesn't like what other people are telling him, he will use that as an excuse for like, oh, I didn't hear you say that, even though he did, and he just didn't agree with what you were saying. You were talking to the bad ear, and I didn't hear you.
Yeah. This is again, like, these are ways you can definitely use something that sounds so simple, right? Just, they're bad of hearing. Okay. You can do so much. So this is the thing. You can decide to not do much with that, only touch upon the moments when it is actually an issue. and you have to point it out. Otherwise, it's like at one point we were researching something for the podcast, and I came upon this forum where people were complaining about misrepresentation. And one of the things that came up so often, it's a minor thing, is that when people who wear glasses know when people who do not wear glasses write people with glasses, because in their worlds, nobody ever has fogged up glasses when they drink their tea or coffee, when they go from inside to outside, or the other way around, right? Which is so simple to just add. So again, like, do your research. What is it actually like to wear glasses, and what is annoying about it? And then just weave that into your plot. But I love that of all the things, like, what types of representation do you find really annoying? That a lot of people said, I hate it when people pretend that having glasses, like that you can just have your coffee and then keep seeing the person in front of you, right?
Or get into a car on a humid day.
Yes. Yeah.
Trying to drive, you've got to put the AC on, or you can't see anything out of your glasses.
But these are the minor things, and that's the people who you're trying to represent. They will pick up on, like, if I give my character a hearing aid and there is absolutely no problem when she's in a pub, that's not, like, no matter whether you have a hearing aid, none of them will make it as if you are perfectly 100% able of hearing, right? Like, there's
and even
always
people
gonna be
who can hear perfectly have problems hearing things in pubs, in crowded, loud places. Even those of us who are not hearing impaired, if you're at a concert and the band's playing and your friend is trying to ask you something, you cannot hear what your friend is saying. And
these days, you just whip out your phone and type it.
Right.
Yeah, but back in the day, you couldn't do that. It was just like,
no. They start trying to shout in your ear, and you're like, I can't wait till after the damn concert.
I think the universal sign for that is like this, like, go away. Like, but yeah, so these are things that you have to, and like you said, like the good ear, the bad ear, which ear is worse, what's your preferred ear to talk in, like, do you do musical chairs, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's very simple. You don't have to have pages on that, right? You don't have to have them keep doing that, but just mention it. Yeah, that makes it more real. Yeah. How about you get food and I go to bed?
Okay. All right. So any last words you want to say about writing diverse characters in fantasy and sci-fi, and anything really?
No, just that it should be fun. Right? Like, see it as an adventure. And you don't have to, you can start small. Like, if you want to start with your like your minor characters, just, to get your feet wet, that's completely fine. Like, you can build up to this. And if you still feel trepidation, like, do email me, email address in the show notes, and then I will get you a copy of the Doing Diversity in Writing Toolkit, which has all the it also has the Calm the Funk Down checklist, but it also has other checklists that will really help you sort of work through, okay, I'm doing this character. What are the questions I need to ask to make sure that I am representing this character in the best way possible, without with harm to none, basically. Yeah. That's it.
Say your name again, because I forgot the pronunciation.
Okay, so do you want the English rendition or the Dutch version?
I want the version that you like best. How do you like it pronounced?
I don't know, actually.
You don't have a preference?
I haven't lived in a Dutch environment for so long. I don't know. Well, so in the Dutch will say Mariëlle. Am I the first person actually speaking Dutch to you in a Dutch accent?
Yeah. I went to the Netherlands in 2001 and everybody spoke English. I was a little relieved because I didn't know any Dutch, and sad because I'd never heard Dutch and I really wanted to hear somebody pronounce all the cool letters with slashes through them and little dots over them. And
we don't. Oh, that's not us. That's like Denmark and Sweden and Norwegian and stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We don't have that. That's like IKEA. That's IKEA language.
Oh, okay. You don't have the interesting
Maybe
letters.
no, I don't think Germans have some very interesting interpunction, but I don't think they have like the O with the cross or the A with like the little circle. I think that's very Scandinavian. Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
The only thing we have is the dots on my name,
Hmm.
which is just sort of it's showing people that you should pronounce the I and the E separately from each other. That it's not one vowel, basically, one vowel sound. But generally, we don't have. Okay, so Dutch Mariëlle. In English, people often say Mariëlle. And if there are any words you want me to say in Dutch, like
Anything.
we
Say
have
something in
words.
Dutch.
Okay, I can say some stuff that you can. So where did you go in the Netherlands?
It was a school trip. We went to Amsterdam for 4 days.
Okay. Well, Amsterdam is very easy to pronounce in like Amsterdam, but we have back in the Second World War when we were occupied by the Germans, a lot of Germans because German is I don't speak German, but it's quite if you start learning it, it has the same roots as Dutch, right? So there were a lot of Germans soldiers who tried to sort of pretend that they were Dutch, right? So they can get information on who was hiding who and stuff like that, right? So the Dutch had a bit of a system. There's a sound that the Germans cannot pronounce, and it's the CH,
Mm-hmm.
which is Dutch has a very hard G sound. So we would ask the Germans to pronounce the name of the town that's like our most famous seaside resort town. So English people probably say Scheveningen, but it's Scheveningen. And we also have a town with people called Den Bosch. That's the shorter version. The full name is 's-Hertogenbosch. And The Hague, the full name of The Hague is 's-Gravenhage, which must hurt to your ears. Yeah.
No, it's cool.
And I used to teach at the University of Utrecht, which is Utrecht. So another very lovely sound, yeah. But that's fun because people never seem to be able to pronounce.
I can't.
But it does. So I hardly speak Dutch, right? In my day-to-day life, and even now I'm like, oh god, like actually pronouncing them like I'm pronouncing them like really well for you, right? And I'm like, oh god, I need tea.
So wait. So then, what language are you speaking? You're living in Cyprus, which I find fascinating.
Well, I speak mostly in English, but I also think and dream in English. So it's not a hard thing for me to do. The only thing I was just talking to one of my editing clients the other day is that I've started speaking Dutch to my cats. I have no idea what that is about. I didn't used to, so that's a new thing for me. But yeah, I do like I even like she asked me, do you think in English? I'm like,
you don't own the cats own you, so they want you to speak to them in Dutch.
My Cypriot cats.
That's what the cat queen has decided.
Really, yeah. No, but I was talking. My editing client, one of my editing clients, asked me yesterday, like, do you think in English? And I was like, I even dream in English. Like, I'm not kidding.
Oh wow! But like living in Cyprus, you're using English with people, or like,
yeah. I mean,
it's
Cyprus,
very Greek, and there's also the Turkish part.
Also, I live in the Greek part, in the Greek Cypriot part. So Cyprus has been a colony of the UK for a long time, until 1960 when they fought for independence and they won. So a lot of people actually do speak English, and it's also, which makes it really hard to. I know very little Greek, Cypriot Greek, normal Greek as well, but also Cypriot Greek, which is slightly different than Greek. But yeah, and there's a lot of people who went to because there's a lot of Cypriots in the UK as well, of course, because it used to be a colony. So there are Cypriots who have like really British accents because they either lived there for a very long time, were born there, and then came back here. They went to school there. So it's especially people my generation like they all speak English, and that's a very touristy country as well.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I think the generation before my generation, I think they have a more of a refusal to speak English because that's the first generation to exist in Cyprus when they were no longer occupied. So I understand that you're like, fuck that. Like I was like when I was young, I had to speak your language, and or my parents were forced to speak your language, and now I refuse. So I see that like the generation, like my mom's generation, doesn't really speak English, but the generation before that, I think, was better in English because they were occupied still at the time. Like they were still a colony. I don't think we call that occupation, but colonized, kind of the same thing. But yeah, so I don't. I'm not in touch with the Turkey. Like there's a huge. There's a border. There's a border. It's like this. It's
no man's land.
There's
area.
a huge no man's. I live very close. Depending on where I go in the village, I will get a text message. Welcome in Cyprus. Because my phone thought that I was in Turkey for a bit. So I live like I literally, where am I? Like if I look that way, it's really dark right now, but there's a hill, and behind that hill is the buffer zone.
Oh wow. How did you end up living in Cyprus?
Because the first time I was here, I just wanted to write. Like nonstop. Like my family was doing like the tourist stuff. And I was like, just let me sit here on my sunbed next to the pool and just write. So I had a notebook with me. I didn't bring my laptop. And I was just doing longhand. And I brought the notebook because it was NaNoWriMo. We were here in November 2017. It was NaNoWriMo. I was like, I'm just going to write longhand on the story I'm writing. That didn't happen. I started writing all these different things. And then I was like, that was sort of I was amazed. And then in June 2018, a friend of mine was like, well, let's go there again and see if it happens again. And we were at that time, we co-wrote a lesbian romance series, a trilogy under a pen name. And so she was like, well, let's go back and see if it happens again. Let's brainstorm the rest of the story, right? Because I think we were just finishing the first book. Same thing happened, right? Like the constant inspiration. And then all kinds of life things happened, right? Like I decided that I wanted to divorce my then partner. I was still working at the university, and they promised me a really good contract because the university were already very precarious, right? Jobs at universities. And they promised me a 3-year contract that they could extend to another 3 years, so 6 years of security. And then when I, in September, got my contract, it was 5.5 months, and it said this cannot be extended, which meant that I had to stay away from the university for 6 months before I was able to be employed again by them. 6 months during which I was not, I couldn't get any benefits, because you only get benefits when you work for a company after 6 months, and they gave me 5.5 months. On purpose, of course, so they didn't have to pay for me in that gap. So I was going through the force. I was really pissed off at not my program, right? But
the university,
because they fought to get me that 3-year contract, right? So I was like, you know what? I'm getting a divorce. So I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my job after these 5.5 months. I've never wanted to live in the Netherlands. I've always wanted to live abroad. Why not pack my bags and buy a one-way ticket to Cyprus, which is what I did. So 2 weeks after my university job ended, I was in the plane. That's 5 years ago now.
Oh wow!
And I also thought,
you obviously found employment and.
Well, no, I was actually so I was juggling my university job with my editing business. And I started into editing because people kept asking me to edit their work. And then as I was at the university, right? So my colleagues and even my professors, right? They were like, hey, check this translation for me. And then one of my friends who was a professional editor, she was like, she sent me something. She said, I want you to edit this. And then I just, she pretended kind of like she had no time. So I was like, I'm not a professional editor, but sure. And then she gave it back with feedback, and I missed like 3 things on the whole text. And it's like, if you catch 70% of mistakes in a text, you're acceptable. And if you're like 95% is considered perfect, right? Nobody can ever catch anything. So she said, you got over 95%. I think you need to consider becoming a professional editor. So that was back in 2014. probably 2013, and then it took me some time to actually do it because I registered as a company as a freelancer in 2014. So I was already juggling those things, and I sometimes had to say no to editing clients, like freelance clients, because I was like in the middle of exam period and I needed to like grade like 100 papers or exams, right? So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna see if I can do this full time, right? I'll write, I'll edit. I was already doing the coaching, although I
You're
was more
living the
coaching.
dream. You're living in Cyprus and on your own terms. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
and the thing is that I was like, you know what, I have enough money to stay there for like 6 months, right? Worst case scenario, I'll fly back and I'll sleep in my old bedroom at my mom's place, right? But like I've been here now for 5 years, so um, something went really well.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, and I love like the idea of going back to regular employment. So no, no, and I love it, and it's really like during the years, like my work is now much more focused on coaching. So I love that I can also see how my business has transformed, right? And I just go with that flow. I just see where it brings me. Yeah. So it's funny because we're talking about this, and this has
Mhm.
nothing to do with my job.
No, I know, but I really wanted to ask you when you said you lived in Cyprus because it sounded so
Mm.
fascinating. So I was like, if I'm fascinated, then listeners would be fascinated too. So that's why I asked. You
Well,
were
I mean,
talking about it a bit.
for those who want to know, I live like by car 5 minutes away from the beach, and on foot 15 minutes. And I've adopted. I worked for a charity for a long time because the cat situation is really bad here. So I worked for a trap, neuter, release charity a long time, and that's how I got to adopt. Well, it used to be 3, but as of this last winter, it's 5
Oh wow! So
cats.
you're the human servant to 5 cat overlords. That's
Yes, I think
brave.
how many do I? Oh no, I had one here on my desk. Yeah, most of my desk is cat beds. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but that's yeah. So that's my life. Um,
That's so interesting.
the only thing that is not as great about the life is that so I when I say I do a lot of coaching, that is usually calls like this.
Hmm.
And my time zone, I most of my American my clients are American, and that's not always helpful. Because even living in the Netherlands, it was slightly because the Netherlands is an hour earlier, so that was a little bit better. Um, so that's like the only downside that I'm like I have so many American clients, and it's either really early for them or it's really late for me.
Yeah.
And some of the work I do can be done offline. Like I work. I don't know if you know what that is. I do Akashic Records readings for people who have like creative struggles, and I can write a report for that. Right, I
Hmm.
don't have to actually have a call with you to discuss the results. I can also just write it out, and then if you have questions, we can just do the back and forth over email. So that does happen. Like if sometimes those in the US are just never mix with mine. Right, it's always and also depending, of course, on what jobs people have. So I do that. So with some stuff, but like regular coaching, you have to have
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
this face-to-face time. But some things I can do. But yeah, I think sometimes it would be. I don't think it would be good for my sanity to live in the US, but time zone wise, it would be much better.
Yeah. 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 It's
But then again, if people really want to work with me, I sometimes do things at crazy hours to get a class from a person. So if people really want to work with me, I mean, there should be a way to do it. Yeah.
yeah. There's got to be some crossover point that maybe not ideal for either, but
Yeah.
that
And that is
works.
so my hours are not like 9 to 5 because of this, right? I'm like, I will work with you until 9 p.m. just because after 9 p.m. I do not
Oh,
trust. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm
The
like, that's the
brains. Yeah.
time. Yeah, that's the time. And I'm like, I lose a lot of my vocabulary.
That was me last
um,
night on the podcast interview. It went over 9 and I'm like,
well,
words, what are they?
it's 10 p.m. So I'm quite impressed with my own relative eloquence at this point. But yeah, it's if I do that regularly, and let's take a week where I don't sleep much for whatever deadlines or whatever, and then I have to have a call, and it's like at 8 p.m. and I always think that my calls are going to be 60 minutes, but that's never the case. And then by the end, I'm just like I can't do the work that I want to do properly. So yeah, but that's I think that's the only downside. Yeah. So like I said, that's my life.
That's just so fascinating. For me, I work a traditional 9-to-5 job and right on the nights and weekends.
Well, stability is nice. Financial stability is nice as well. Like I do have like I have peaks and I have like, what's it called, valleys.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, and those, the valleys are not fun. And then you're like,
Yeah.
am I ever gonna, like, is anybody ever gonna hire me again? And then of course they all come at the same. As soon as I say, what is this? Like, where is everyone? Then like there's 3 new people in my inbox. I'm like, oh God, now I need to schedule you all in. So I don't think I'll ever get used to that like sometimes, but what I do try these days, so this is for writers who are also freelancers. I'm more relaxed about, like, I used to have big plans for like my books and all the stuff I do to get that right. So I feel like that's like a job for me. And then I have my day job is the editing and the coaching. And now I'm more like, I have certain things that I want to reach with my books, but on weeks that I have like the day job, that I have client work, I'm just not gonna, because what I used to do is then I just added that, right? So I scheduled, I have no clients, then that's great. I have so much stuff I've been wanting to do. Like, I'm still in the process of getting all my books as wide as possible. So I had this sort of drought a while ago, and I was like, I'm just going to focus on that, right? And then suddenly clients came in, but then in my head I'm like, oh, but I have this plan for my books, and then I don't let go of that. So I recently realized, if then the clients come in, I have to consciously say, that means that this plan is now on hold, and you're not doing both, because you go, like, burnout is very soon around the corner if you do. And so I'm trying to learn from that, right? Like, it's either this, and so
I do
if it's
both, because the day job is always there.
Yeah.
There's
So
there's a drought, it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So
yeah. So, and I don't mind, like, I work most nights, right? So I really don't mind that, especially when I'm writing and I have a deadline. So but it's like if I like, I realize, like, oh, I keep doing this as a pattern that keeps repeating for myself. How do I stop that? I'm like, well, just allow myself that, well, the day job is really busy now. I started to resent the day job, and I'm like, that's not the good energy that I want to put out there. So I'm like, no, because I have rent to pay, as one does, or mortgage to pay, depending on your situation. So I'm like, I'm just going to be really grateful. The only thing I get resentful because I feel like I have to do both now, and I need to stop doing that. Like, I can do some things, like I cannot do a full-time job worth of writing business when I'm already also now have full-time editing work, this particular week. And that I'm like, so I recently
do part-time author stuff.
But this is the thing, like, I recently celebrated 10 years of being a freelancer, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm now learning the lesson 10 years in. That's better late than never, maybe.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, bedtime for me, lunchtime for
Thank you for coming on the podcast. This has been another episode of Fantasy Lore and More. Today we talked about writing diverse characters with Mariëlle S. I pronounced it wrong. Okay. I see here.
Okay, but
correct me.
Okay, so no one in the Netherlands can pronounce my last name, and that should be very easy for you.
Smith. I just stopped because, like, I got your reaction, and I was like,
because you turn it into an I. You turn it into an I.
Mariëlle.
Yeah, but it's an A. Mariëlle.
Mariëlle. Thank you. Am I close?
Yes. We're just gonna call it acceptable. I mean, it's fine. Okay. I'll listen to it. I'm not. I know some people are particular, and I always honor that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not that person myself.
Okay, I just don't like mispronouncing names. I try really hard to get them right, and sometimes I just fail miserably.
If I come on the podcast again, I'll send you the phonetic version.
That this should help, I hope.
Yes, I'll do that.
Well, hopefully you will come back. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll have her back for something.
Maybe when I finally finish one of my fantasy books, I can actually speak about it.
Yes, this is a fantasy book podcast.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's no hard and fast rule that says the book has to be published when you come on and talk about it.
Okay, maybe when I finally start doing the ream thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I don't have hard and fast rules on this because reading is reading, and reading on an app for many people is more accessible and more enjoyable, and we don't discriminate. We like people to read whatever makes them happy.
Yes.
So thank you. Have a great day or great night wherever you are, and next week we'll be back with another fantasy author, another fantasy book. I have no idea what we're talking about, but it'll be something and it'll be fun. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things so that you get notified. Thank you.